Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today, as PCPP continue to give you learnings through digital platform, 9 speakers will talk today with focus on supply, animal welfare, genome sequencing, and future investments with antimicrobial monitoring, farm operations, and poultry diseases, and digitalization and market resiliency. Our moderator for this morning is a graduate of veterinary science and medicine at Central Luzon State University, Philippines, and a Master of Science in Veterinary Medicine, major in monogastric nutrition from the University of Queensland in Australia. She also completed international courses on pig husbandry and feed technology at Barneveld College, the Netherlands. She worked in commercial swine farms for 4 years before joining the International Training Center on Pig Husbandry, where she worked as training specialist for 8 years. She currently holds the position of Regional Technical Director for the United States Soybean Export Council in the Southeast Asia. She is a 2-term president of the Philippine Society of Animal Nutritionists and was vice president and president of the Philippine College of Veterinary Feed Practitioners and an active member of the Philippine College of Poultry Practitioners. She is also a member of the U.S. and Southeast Asia Animal Nutrition Working Group. She is also a recipient of Outstanding Veterinarian Award in Animal Nutrition practiced by the Philippine Veterinary Medical Association, and also an outstanding alumna of Central Luzon State University and College of Veterinary Science and Medicine in CLSU, Science of Muñoz, Nueva Ecija in the Philippines. In 2019, she received the highest award of Outstanding Animal Nutrition by PhilSan. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome our first moderator for this morning session, Dr. Basilisa Nenet P. Reyes.
Wow, thank you. A pleasant good morning, everyone. Magandang umaga po sa ating lahat, and welcome to the second day of the PCPP Poultry School Online. My name is Nenet Pascual Reyes, and I will be your moderator this morning. Well, yesterday we have covered very interesting and key topics on broilers and layers. This morning, we will be having another 5 significant topics that include poultry welfare, diseases, and medicine. These topics will be given by esteemed and outstanding foreign and Filipino professionals here in the Philippines and abroad. And now, let me introduce to you our first speaker for this morning's session. Our speaker earned her bachelor's degree in poultry science, animal science, and Bachelor of Science in Veterinary Medicine in North Carolina State University in the US, and her specialty Avian Medicine in UNAM in Mexico. In 2008, the North Carolina State University College of Agriculture and Life Sciences commended our speaker as outstanding alumni in 2008 and 2015. She worked in various capacities at Cobb Vantress Inc. from 2003 in Central America and in Europe until 2011. Currently, our speaker is the Director of World Animal Welfare in Cobb Vantress Inc. So, ladies and gentlemen, to talk about advances in poultry welfare, please welcome Dr. Catherine Barger Weathers. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to be part of the 2021 seminar for the Philippine College of Poultry Practitioners. My name is Kate Barger Weathers, and I'm the Director of Global Welfare for Cobb Vantress. Animal welfare is not a new topic for veterinarians or for the poultry industry. However, it is one that continues to evolve as scientific understanding, technology, and innovative equipment allow us to better understand what poultry want and need. During this presentation, I will focus on the synergy of animal health and animal well-being, and the significance of the 3 M's for welfare assessment and improvement. Since many of you likely work with broilers, I will also provide a practical overview of key components of recognized broiler welfare standards and criteria, and I will provide examples of how to assess and score welfare outcomes in an objective manner. Finally, I will highlight the importance of having a comprehensive approach to welfare within the strategic plan and business model for poultry companies and the supply chain. And I will mention some possible aspects we might see in the future with regards to welfare standards, innovation, and newer methods for assessing poultry welfare. I would like to begin by reviewing philosophical principles for welfare that have been used as the foundational components for many global poultry programs. While slightly different in concept, these principles highlight the synergy of the physical health of an animal with the mental well-being status. For example, the 5 freedoms shown here were originally proposed in the United Kingdom by the Farm Animal Welfare Council in 1965. This welfare philosophy emphasized negative conditions for physical function for animals and mental states of animals that should be avoided or prevented. In 1997, Fraser proposed the 3 circles, as shown here, as a model for defining and evaluating animal welfare. He emphasized that the balance or intersection of the 3 circles was important. In this model, the basic health and function of the animal, what we would refer to as the physical health or biological function, and the ability of the animal to have a natural life, which includes normal behaviors and natural elements, and the affective states or behavioral status of the animal are important to optimize positive behavior and minimize negative emotions. All of these are important. However, while there is an overlap from one area to another, Fraser highlighted that one circle is not more important than another. For domesticated animals, including commercial poultry, we know that daily care of the birds is necessary and an essential component of welfare outcome for the flock. In 2007, the UK Farm Animal Welfare Council recognized the importance of animal care for achieving good welfare and emphasized the qualities of personnel working with animals in this foundational component known as the 3 essentials of good stockmanship. The 3 essentials include knowledge, skills, and personal qualities of dedication and patience. While simple in concept, we use this model as the reason for a required monthly and annual training for animal welfare, and we believe that having trained, knowledgeable, and dedicated employees will help in better daily care and attention to details for all staff and employees who work in our hatcheries and in our farms. If we recall the principles of the 5 freedoms, we remember that they highlight negative states that should be avoided. However, we know that complete avoidance and prevention are not always practical or possible. For example, as veterinarians, we know that thirst results in animals drinking water and hunger results in animals eating the food that we provide. We also know that some normal behaviors, for example, pecking that leads to cannibalism, are not desirable. So, this newer philosophical approach to animal welfare focuses on the 5 domains or the 5 provisions, and these were proposed by Mellor from New Zealand in recent years. The 5 domains model for welfare emphasizes positive states for care and welfare. For example, we must first provide for the basic physical and functional needs of the animal, using appropriate nutrition and environment, and optimize the behavioral and physical health of the animal. We can then promote positive experiences by identifying opportunities for enhancement of the animal's environment and examine positive outcomes and behaviors of each animal. This then allows us to achieve a more desirable welfare status and allows us to have a better understanding of the animal's needs and ultimately better welfare outcomes. Perhaps a more practical and memorable way to view welfare is to consider it simply as a concept that involves the synergy of poultry health with well-being. For example, if you are walking through a house of breeder hens and roosters, you will likely observe the physical and mental or behavioral status of the flock. We want to see roosters and hens that have good feathering, good physical condition, normal coloration of the area around the head, and we should see normal interaction of the flock and birds that either follow us or move away from us as we walk throughout the barn. However, if we notice a hen that is hiding under a feeder or perhaps in a corner, this hen's behavioral characteristics and well-being are indicative of a bird that does not have a good state of welfare. Then, if we catch and carefully examine the hen, we may see that there is a physical defect with a foot, or perhaps she is injured or has a health problem resulting in her abnormal behavior. Similarly, if the birds are too cold, they will huddle together and will be less active. In both of these examples, we can easily understand how the physical status and the mental or behavioral status of the poultry are related when we evaluate overall welfare status for the flock. When we think about welfare in this way, it is easier to understand how the provisions of feed, water, air, litter quality, lighting, and the environment can positively or negatively impact the welfare status of the flock. And with this understanding, we can also emphasize that each person, regardless of role at the hatchery, farm, during catching or transport, or even unloading at the processing plant, can evaluate the health and well-being of poultry and can positively or negatively impact the experiences of the birds in the flock. And as such, each person has responsibility for optimizing the care and welfare status of the birds. Now, let's evaluate broiler welfare using these three photos that represent different examples of housing and management styles. Without looking at the data from health status, livability of the flock, efficiency, and performance numbers, or scores from welfare audits, we could ask company leaders, government officials, animal advocacy groups and NGOs, and even supply chain partners from food and retail companies about their perception of the welfare status of broiler chickens simply based on these photographic examples. Depending on their knowledge of poultry and their perspective on welfare, they would likely have very different conclusions about which management and housing style is best for the chickens. However, if we take a more objective approach and answer these simple questions below, we can evaluate the physical and functional outcome of the flock and also have a better understanding of the mental and behavioral outcomes. I use this example to highlight the complexity of welfare. Often welfare is an emotional trigger for people who want to promote change. However, as shown by Miller's example of the 5 domains, we must really take the time to objectively evaluate welfare and to understand if we are providing for the physical and mental needs of the animals, how we are enhancing the experience of the animals, and then we can summarize if the system and the housing type actually achieve a more positive welfare status and outcome for the broilers. This brings me to the next learning point of this talk, the 3 M's for welfare. Dr. Temple Grandin, shown here, famously stated, "You manage what you measure." So the 3 M's of welfare include monitoring, measuring, and managing welfare. These 3 simple guiding factors can be used to verify and understand if the 5 provisions in the 5 domains are being achieved. They are easy to implement and apply for different types of poultry and at different aspects of production companies, including farms, hatcheries, handling procedures, and even the processing plant. Using the 3 M's, we can also assess risk and promote continuous improvement of welfare outcomes. We'll start with the first M for monitor. Criteria that should be monitored are usually age-specific and also flock type-specific. For example, there are some criteria that we will monitor for newly placed chicks and others that we will monitor for hens and roosters in a breeder house. When focusing on criteria that are used to monitor welfare, there are 3 main categories. These may be outcome-based criteria that allow us to monitor how well the animal is doing within the system and typically involve on-site observations and a review of flock records. These may also be referred to as animal-based criteria, or in our case, bird-based criteria for poultry welfare. Protocol-based criteria allow us to monitor if protocols and systems are in place to ensure adequate animal care. Facility-based criteria monitor the inputs that are provided to the animals and are needed to optimize their daily care. Normally, there are specific criteria that are relevant to the facility where the poultry are being evaluated. For example, a farm, hatchery, or processing plant. In this case, we will use observations as well as review of records to observe and to audit facility-based criteria. Here we can see examples of poultry criteria that may be monitored for each of these categories. For outcome-based or bird-based criteria, we may monitor foot pad and hawk condition of a sampling of the birds, evaluate the gait and mobility of the birds, and also review records to evaluate the culling and mortality rates. Protocol-based measures may include the written program for lighting, and the program that the farm has for ventilation and temperature control. It may also include documentation related to welfare training for employees and written protocols for euthanasia and culling expectations and methods. Finally, examples for facility-based criteria can include air quality, litter quality, actual light intensity and uniformity as monitored during the audit, feeder space, and slat height for breeders. The second M is for measuring welfare. In this example, we use an outcome-based criteria that we're monitoring on each broiler flock to ensure that we can objectively assess foot pad condition. We will use a specific protocol that tells us how many birds or feet to evaluate, where the measurement should occur, and which tool or scorecard should be used to measure to assess if the sample passes or fails. In the example here from the National Chicken Council of the United States that requires 200 feet to be measured, and it also specifies that the measurement should occur at the processing plant so that feet are clean and broiler welfare is not negatively impacted by handling and inverting 100 birds on the farm. The scorecard shown here is from the American Association of Avian Pathologists, or AAAP, and provides specific details and photographic examples to allow for objective measurement of a pass or a fail outcome for broiler feet as measured at the processing plant. In this example, we'll use a protocol-based criteria as we measure the euthanasia protocol for a poultry company. During an audit, we'll review the written protocol for euthanasia and the euthanasia training that the company provides to farmers and farm staff. We will also review the criteria for culling that is expected as a part of the animal care and welfare program. Finally, during an on-farm visit, we will interview farm staff to verify their training and to see if their answers are aligned with the culling criteria and euthanasia methods that were included in the SOPs and training documentation. Furthermore, during the farm visit, we will also verify welfare status of birds in several barns to see if proactive culling is taking place to remove birds with physical defects as shown here in the culling guide. While at the farm, we will also evaluate facility-based criteria. In this instance, this includes measurement of litter quality and air quality. Depending on the audit criteria, we might also evaluate moisture level of the litter using the hand test shown here. For this simple but objective measurement, we will pick up a handful of litter and compact it in our hand. If the litter is dry and friable, it likely has less than 35% moisture, which would be a pass for the audit. However, if the litter remains in a clump in our hand, it likely has a higher than expected moisture level and would fail this portion of the audit. Some audits also have criteria related to litter depth, as this can be related to bird and flock comfort. Another commonly measured item for poultry audits is air quality, specifically ammonia concentration at bird height. There are different tools that can be used to assess air quality, and it's important to ensure that your device is calibrated or that you have a reference guide as shown here in the bottom right picture. In this example, our goal is less than 25 parts per million at bird height, and the protocol tells us to assess this at the front, middle, and end of the house. In this example, we wet the paper and we can see that the sample was within the normal expected limits of 25 parts per million based on the coloration of the paper and would therefore pass. The final M is for managing welfare. After monitoring and measuring various criteria, it is important to take corrective actions if needed and to consider proactive steps to continue to improve the objectives of the welfare program. Many poultry companies use their audits to compare results. For example, comparing 2021 results versus results from prior years, and sometimes comparing how a feed change or lighting change impacts welfare outcomes. Additionally, poultry companies may manage their outcomes by allowing them to assess welfare improvements at each location, to identify risk areas, and to objectively measure how different trials impact results from other facilities. For the supply chain, many progressive companies are using results from their welfare assessments to compare one supplier versus another supplier within the same region. This comparison requires transparency and standardization of welfare reporting from the suppliers, but it allows the supply chain partner to have credibility with their labeling and also to highlight their year-on-year improvements within their supply chain. It also allows them to have a point of differentiation from their competitors within the same food business sector. When managing welfare outcomes and audits, companies typically focus on how they can better manage risk within their business and also how they can benchmark their continuous improvement. One example of this would be looking at the top 5 criteria that are deficient on welfare audits. A poultry company can then evaluate when and why facilities are not meeting those expectations, and also perhaps can consider ranking specific facilities based on risk level. Perhaps the reason for the deficiency is related to the competency of staff, and then this will result in improved training for all personnel at that facility. Perhaps the reason for the audit criteria failure is related to equipment challenges, and this can then result in better protocols, better maintenance, and reviews of facility-based criteria during future audits to verify what is expected in a proactive manner. If management teams take the time to review and manage welfare criteria on a regular basis, they will be able to mitigate risk and can improve how they hold their employees and their facilities accountable for high expectations. This accountability may include an increase in the frequency of audits for high-risk areas, more hands-on training for staff, corrective action timelines and consequences for failures, or enhanced daily self-reporting from supervisors to ensure that welfare criteria are being achieved between the official audits. Conversely, if facilities continue to have failures for specific criteria and there is no analysis for why and what is at fault, the outcomes will likely not improve. Welfare criteria and programs are only effective if they have a multi-level buy-in from all managers at all facilities, and if the results are being effectively managed and driven forward to meet or exceed the standards. Now, let's take a practical look at broiler welfare. Areas for assessment should include all of these operations involved with broiler care, management, and handling, so that bird-based, facility-based, and protocol-based criteria can be monitored, measured, and managed. For many companies and welfare programs, there is an expectation for both internal and external audits. Internal audits may include first-person audits, also known as self-audits, which can be completed on a daily basis by the farmer, by a vaccination crew supervisor, or by a quality control employee in the hatchery or the processing plant. These checks may include daily care parameters like maximum and minimum temperatures, mortality and culling numbers, water consumption, injury rates, and stunning efficiency in the processing plant. Second-person audits are those which are conducted by a company employee who is not directly involved in the daily care and management of the poultry at the location. Typically, second-person auditors are from support service teams within the company and include quality assurance and welfare auditors and veterinarians. The audits conducted by these second-person auditors are more comprehensive in nature and may occur weekly, monthly, or quarterly. They often include verification of the daily care parameters, completion of expected training, implementation of company protocols, and observation of bird handling, euthanasia methods, and the condition of equipment used in the bird area. Audits may be specific for one area, for example, a hatchery or farm, to allow the company to specifically manage the outcomes for that type of facility. External audits, also referred to as third-person or third-party audits, are conducted by an external independent professional. The auditor may come from an auditing company or may be an auditor from the supply chain partner receiving the broiler meat. These audits are comprehensive and typically occur once or twice per year. Audits will include all aspects of the company during a multi-day audit. The auditor may visit the hatchery, several broiler farms, the processing plant, and the corporate office to verify all expectations and criteria. Now that we've talked about who conducts welfare audits, let's take a comprehensive approach to the welfare program for a poultry company. If you were asked which of the items listed here is most important and which one drives success for achieving welfare expectations, how would you prioritize these items? Do you think that audits and documentation of outcomes are more important than training and research efforts for advancing welfare? Or do you think that these are all important? My hope is that you will see that all of these are important and all are drivers of achieving a successful and comprehensive welfare program. Senior leadership is critically important in developing and supporting a culture of care. In fact, many welfare audits require written documentation of senior leadership that supports and endorses the welfare program. We've previously discussed the importance of standards to ensure that criteria are measured in an objective manner. If you are developing and expanding your company's welfare program, I encourage you to get input from your production managers so that your internal guidelines are practical and also set a high standard for what should be achieved. Audits are useful to inspect what we expect. Documenting outcomes on audits allows for continuous improvement and encourages accountability for results. Research and innovation are important for the future of welfare, and we'll cover this topic at the end of the presentation. In the next few slides, I will provide examples of welfare training and risk assessment that you may want to consider for your welfare program. People are the most important factor for improving welfare. Throughout the world, it is becoming more difficult to find and hire qualified and experienced employees who understand poultry management and care. In many situations, we must look for people who have good attitudes and appear to have good values that are aligned with our company values. It is then our responsibility to increase the knowledge and skills of the employees over time. Training should be viewed as a continuous plan in which we are focused on increasing the competency and the capability of our employees so that they can contribute to our culture of care. For example, if we have training for euthanasia of poultry on farms, we need to focus on improving the knowledge of the employees so that they first understand which bird should be culled and what euthanasia methods are allowed. We then may require hands-on training to ensure that the employees can demonstrate how to correctly conduct the method. Finally, to ensure that employees understand the goals of the timely euthanasia program that we have and protocol, we have to ensure that they understand why this process is important for the health and welfare of the flock. Training frequency varies based by company. Our experience is that training should be comprehensive and should be provided consistently and regularly. We specialize training by work area and also account for the native language, education level of employees, and any additional legislative or cultural considerations to optimize the results and the compliance. For example, for our animal welfare training, we start with onboarding, in which we introduce the concepts of animal welfare to the employee. This onboarding training takes place in the first 1 to 2 days of employment. Then, within the first 45 days of employment, we conduct a hands-on training using a checklist like the one shown here. This hands-on training provides practical tips and examples for bird care, handling, and behavior. Typically, an on-site manager conducts this welfare training with the new employee over several days within the working area to increase both the competency and the comfort level of the new employee in their work environment with the type and age of birds that they will be caring for in their new role. For all employees that work with live poultry, we provide customized monthly training that is relevant to the hatchery, farm, or transportation area where the employees work. We believe that this monthly awareness training is important to help increase the knowledge of our employees for key welfare criteria, and also we want to enhance their understanding of the criteria that we evaluate during our routine welfare audits. We regularly remind all of our employees that everyone is responsible for welfare. By improving the skills and the knowledge of our employees, they can do a better job each day at their location, and we'll let a manager know when there's a concern with regards to a facility-based criteria or a bird-based criteria that they might observe. To ensure completion of the training, we have a short quiz on the second page and require individual sign-offs when training is completed. This process ensures accountability and transparency and also allows us to verify our protocol-based criteria during audits. Finally, we conduct annual training for all of our employees, staff, and farmers. This welfare training is customized for each location and includes relevant photos and examples to emphasize welfare standards, various company policies for bird handling and euthanasia, and the importance of reporting any concerns. As shown here with the cover slide from our annual training, the training is in the appropriate language for the employees or farmers who speak Spanish and are receiving this information. To optimize the training process and to ensure that the same message is being delivered to all regardless of educational background, we have converted all of our annual training presentations into videos. This allows us to be more detailed in our training material and frequency, but again, we believe that training is paramount to increasing the competency and the skills of all of our employees and farmers. And by providing this training, we can ensure that they are aligned with our welfare expectations. The second item that I want to highlight is risk assessment and why this must be part of a comprehensive welfare program. Previously, we discussed the significance of managing welfare outcomes to identify and mitigate risk. Here I want to highlight the importance of planning ahead to be prepared for possible hazards that can impact poultry health and welfare, and the importance of determining a response plan to minimize the impact for vulnerable assets. For example, if a notifiable disease like avian influenza is present in the region, do you have protocols, people, and equipment in place to monitor for the disease? And what will you do to depopulate flocks if this is required? Identifying the assets at risk and having contingency plans for the use and the availability of these resources like people and equipment during a crisis is a key part of the planning stage. If there is a natural disaster like a cyclone that impacts your farms for an extended period of time, do you have plans in place to provide feed, electricity, and care for the birds while the infrastructure recovers? What will the impact of this situation be for your property, your supply chain decisions, and the integrity of your business? During the last 18 months, we've seen the terrible impact of a pandemic disease on global health and global business operations. I suspect that few companies had identified a pandemic disease as a possible long-term hazard that would put people, poultry, business reputations, and finances at risk. However, now many companies do have plans in place to ensure that the pandemic impacts on absenteeism of employees, poultry care and processing, and business interruption are minimized in the year ahead. From a business perspective, having a plan in place and ensuring that leaders are aware of the details can help minimize the negative consequences for welfare and for human safety. Finally, it is important to understand the minor differences in risk assessment, risk management, and risk communication. All are critically important when you are responding to a hazard so that you can minimize the impacts on vulnerable assets like people, poultry, and infrastructure. Each must be a part of your comprehensive welfare plan so that you are not simply responding to the danger like a firefighter putting out a fire, but rather you are responding to the crisis in a professional manner that ultimately leads to opportunity and improvement. A prime example of the importance of these three areas in planning ahead is the example of responding to allegations of egregious animal abuse. In this crisis scenario, the business reputation and supply chain decisions may be impacted if the crisis is not quickly and efficiently and effectively managed. Risk management may be conducted with audits by third-party auditors to verify that training is implemented, welfare policies are in place, and welfare outcomes are being achieved per supply chain standards. Risk assessment may take place by reviewing video footage of the alleged abuse, by interviewing employees who witnessed and/or were involved in the situation, and by evaluating the actual condition of the facility and the welfare status of the birds at the location. Finally, risk communication should take place to ensure that both internal and external messaging is carefully managed so that you can respond to the allegation, increase transparency, and address any concerns that have been raised by supply chain partners. Learning from crisis situations will make you stronger and will enable you to better respond to future hazards and to view the outcome as an opportunity for improvement. I've mentioned the importance of the poultry supply chain and welfare in various portions of my presentation. Many of the changes that we are seeing and experiencing now are due to the disconnect of the consumer with food production and due to the influence of the supply chain on production expectations. In most countries, very few people work in agriculture, and most consumers have very little understanding about how and where their food is produced. Furthermore, while the general public has embraced the use of technology for their cars, homes, phones, and workplaces, few realize that the poultry industry has also increased the use of automated equipment and innovative technology to enhance poultry care and welfare. As a result of the disconnect between those that consume food and those that produce food, we now often see labels like these on poultry packaging. For example, poultry meat labels may include wording like all natural, antibiotic-free, chickens that are hand-raised on farms, and poultry that are raised in cage-free and humane environments or fed an all-veggie diet. Meat may be presented to the consumer in the form of breast fillets, as minced meat, or in the shape of dinosaur nuggets, as shown here. All of these labels and variable forms of meat are not always linked back to the hard work that takes place on farms, in hatcheries, and in processing plants on a daily basis. However, Everything that happens from the day of hatch until the day of slaughter is part of the trust that the supply chain has with how we operate to produce food for their sale to consumers. As broiler welfare has evolved over the last 20 years, the creation and expansion of welfare standards from supply chain leaders, governments, and industry bodies has resulted in increased accountability, transparency, and value. I have no doubt that we will be required to continue improving our results in the future to maintain this trust. Thus, when we think about food origin and how food is produced, the trust model is often used in the industry as an example of the social license that poultry companies must have to achieve trust with the public and their supply chain partners. A social license to operate is defined as the ongoing acceptance of standard business practices and operating procedures by employees, stakeholders, supply chain, and the public. This is needed to create and maintain trust and to achieve permission to conduct your daily business. For example, a poultry company may state that they have a robust welfare program and they care about their chickens and their employees. However, the broiler company must slaughter chickens as part of their business model in order to provide meat to their customers and supply chain partners. Killing animals is not something that normally results in confidence and trust in the eyes of the consumer or the general public. However, by highlighting shared values of optimizing bird care on farms, by showing that audits are conducted to verify and enhance transparency with production practices and slaughter expectations, and by implementing welfare standards as a part of business operations, a company can increase the trust for both internal and external stakeholders. If the business achieves and maintains this trust, they will be granted the social license and the freedom to operate. Conversely, during a crisis scenario, if risk is not managed correctly and risk communication is not done effectively, this can lead to a fracture in trust and can result in a company losing its freedom to operate in the eyes of the supply chain and the consumers. Now let's talk about the future of poultry welfare. I'm often asked what is next for poultry welfare, or what criteria will change and what technology may help us improve welfare outcomes. I like this quote by the baseball legend Yogi Berra, in which he stated, "It's tough to make predictions, especially about the future." While I can't predict what will happen in the next 1 to 2 or even 10 years, I would like to highlight a few key areas for the future of poultry welfare. Then I'll finish this talk by highlighting some exciting examples that may change how we think about and how we evaluate poultry welfare in the future. First, the future of welfare standards is a current dilemma for the poultry industry and the supply chain, and is one that will have tremendous impact on the future of poultry welfare. For countries that are in the process of developing their national standards, they may look to OIE chapters on welfare as a starting point. For countries that have developed a national standard in partnership with their poultry industry, there must be a universal expectation for all poultry companies to meet or exceed these standards. For countries that develop national standards via legislative requirements, the challenge will be to verify the implementation of the standard and to allow for enough flexibility for future innovation and technology for the evolution of welfare science. Currently, many supply chain standards are being developed, and these vary by restaurant and by food or retail company. While there are some fundamental similarities for many of these standards, the criteria and the measurement of the criteria are often quite unique. If I could influence the future for poultry welfare, I would ensure that welfare standards are outcome-based and not input-related. It simply makes more sense to monitor and measure how the animal is doing in the environment, what poultry prefer, and the resulting welfare state of the flock rather than mandating requirements that humans perceive to be important. I also hope that the future will include criteria that can be objectively verified, criteria that have scientific relevance, and ones that are more specific for each type, age, and species of poultry. We often state that turkeys are not big chickens, and thus we need to use specific criteria that are relevant to each type and species of poultry. Similarly, the measurement of standards and criteria used for broilers are not always applicable for pullets or breeders. As previously shown in this presentation, there are some standardized measurements for items like footpad scoring and air quality. However, in the future, I think it will be important to ensure that more of these standard guidelines are developed as technology evolves to allow us to more objectively measure criteria for welfare on site, whether it be in a hatchery, farm, or at the processing plant. As we think about the future of poultry welfare, I believe that the implementation of technology will result in improved care and welfare outcomes. For example, by viewing what sounds a flock is emitting when the bird sounds increase, the farmer can investigate what is happening inside the house and within the environment that is resulting in the flock being more stressed. For typical broiler farms, the dark period is typically a block of 6 to 8 consecutive hours when the lights are out and the birds rest. In this example of using sound to more accurately understand bird behavior and bird comfort, the dark blue blocks occur from midnight to approximately 6 a.m., and this correlates to the time when the birds are quiet and sleeping since lights are out. However, at approximately day 30 to 33, as shown here by the red arrow, during the grow-out period, you can see that the color blocks are a lighter color during this same dark period. This indicates that the birds were more active, made more noise, and perhaps were more stressed during these nighttime hours. Upon investigation, the farmer discovered that there was a squeaking fan that needed maintenance repairs. So although a farmer may not be present in the house or in the chicken barn 24 hours a day, this type of technology can help explain the type of environment that a bird prefers and wants, and can also help explain when the environment is not ideal. As a veterinarian, I am very hopeful that similar technology will allow for the detection of coughing or snicking sounds in the future, so that we can more promptly and proactively respond to a flock that may be experiencing early stages of a respiratory illness. Self-driving robots are already in use in other industries, and there is a great interest in the possibility of using this technology for poultry farms and hatcheries. As mentioned earlier, if we want to prioritize the knowledge and efficiency of our farm staff, robotics may be able to help us with this in the future. If robots can identify floor eggs, mortality, or non-mobile poultry in a flock, or can even monitor air and litter quality conditions throughout the day and night, the farmer could more proactively respond to the situation and would also have more time to focus on observations like poultry behavior and also repairing equipment when needed in the barn. The introduction and implementation of equipment to better evaluate bird behavior, mobility, and preference could be a game changer for poultry welfare. For example, instead of mandating inputs related to light intensity for broilers, perhaps the focus should be on the light that the broilers actually prefer when they are eating and drinking, as shown here by the red arrow, versus the intensity that birds prefer when they are resting and dust bathing, as shown here by the blue arrow. If our goals are to increase natural behavior within a flock, I believe it is important to evaluate what type of enrichments poultry prefer, how and when they use the enrichments, and what welfare benefits these may provide for the life of the flock. Other technology like infrared imaging is commonly used for other animals in other industries, and now is becoming more popular in poultry. In the hatchery and on the farm, this equipment can help us understand the impact of ventilation, airflow, and temperature as it relates to bird comfort. Various companies are evaluating camera and optical equipment to better understand flock distribution, activity, and movement within the barn. Other companies are evaluating wearable technology for chickens and floor-based equipment that can evaluate bird movement, gait, and activity. While I am excited about this new technology and the future potential it has, I hope it will do more than just highlight how and when chickens move and behave. I hope that it will truly enable us, as scientists, veterinarians, and production experts, to better understand the biological changes of the chicken and the intersection of health, nutrition, welfare, and behavior, so that we have healthy, productive chickens with good welfare and physiological health and care during all stages of their lives. Most of the focus on improvements in welfare are focused on the farm, hatchery, and transportation. While poultry are only at the processing plant for a few hours prior to slaughter, I think that future technology and equipment at the processing plant will allow for increased sampling and increased accuracy of welfare monitoring and measuring as we look after the stunning process. For example, instead of conducting footpad evaluations by scoring 200 feet in a manual assessment, as I mentioned previously, there is technology being developed and even used in some countries that allows for all feet to be evaluated and scored using optical tools. Instead of sampling 100 birds during a visit, This technology would allow for thousands of birds to be evaluated, and this would provide more transparency for the welfare status of the entire flock. Some people believe that welfare assessments end at the time that poultry is slaughtered. While there is some truth to this, since poultry are no longer living, I think that there are items that we can assess in the slaughter plant that can add value to our overall perspective of broiler welfare and various inputs that occur at the farm level. And we have to remember that the end product that we want to optimize is what is served to the consumer in the form of poultry meat. For example, research that focuses on innovation in nutrition, stunning methods, and the health of the flock can positively impact welfare and meat quality outcomes, and even food safety for the supply chain. In the past year, the global industry experienced tremendous challenges when slaughter plants closed due to COVID-19 restrictions and health concerns in the workforce. Innovative equipment and research that would enable processing plants to function with less people and would allow more flexibility in bird size could result in tremendous opportunities for improvements in welfare, human health and safety, and sustainability in the future. During my 18 years in the poultry industry, I've had the joy of traveling to many different countries. The variability in farms, housing, and production practices are quite unique in different parts of the world. I have observed differences in the source of light, density and growth rates, what is included in the environment for broilers and breeders, differences in the frequency and type of interaction of the people with the birds, and type of litter and nutrition provided, as well as differences in the health and biosecurity programs. In all examples, farmers can achieve excellent welfare results and good flock performance if daily care and the physical and mental needs of the birds are optimized. In the future, I believe that we will see changes in the style and design of poultry houses that are truly reflective of innovative thinking and optimal welfare, health, environmental, and economic aspects of poultry production. Given the long-term investment in the construction of poultry housing on farms, hatcheries, and processing plants, it is critical to have designs that enhance energy and water conservation, create an environment that is pleasant, efficient, and safe for people working there, and considers the footprint and the impact from a land, air, and water and resource perspective. These three photos represent current poultry production in various parts of the world. I don't know which of these will be more prominent or preferred in the future, or which ones may even be allowed. As we think about different perspectives of those who may mandate welfare standards, some groups may believe that one style is better than another. Regardless of what future housing looks like and what poultry infrastructure looks like, I hope that we will be able to monitor, measure, and manage results to optimize the welfare of poultry at each location. We may also have facilities that align with consumer perception and sustainability expectations. Thank you for your attention during my presentation. I hope that you'll agree with me that animal welfare is a journey and not a destination. The future is bright as we consider innovative changes, new technology, and improved understanding of welfare. By focusing on outcome-based criteria for the animals, facilities, and protocols, we can and will make continuous improvement in what we measure and how we manage welfare at each facility. However, our understanding and focus on specific criteria must adapt as equipment and science advance our understanding of what poultry prefer and need. Poultry management is an art, and we must be able to adjust and improve in the future if we are to remain competitive and make positive improvements. The supply chain and the consumer will continue to prioritize welfare, care, and bird health as primary measures when making choices about food. These stakeholders may not ever visit a poultry farm, but they expect that we will do the right thing to optimize poultry welfare, sustainable agriculture, and to produce safe, affordable meat. Welfare must be a key component of the culture of poultry companies to guarantee that birds are cared for in an appropriate and humane manner throughout their lifetime. Technology like sound, robotics, and other innovative tools will help us be more accurate in the future, but we must still emphasize the importance of having cared, skilled, and dedicated people to achieve our welfare goals. Regardless of where you are on your welfare journey, you will manage what you measure. I encourage you to set high expectations for what you want to achieve and be clear about how you will inspect what you expect for welfare. If you're just starting your program, take small steps to develop your program and begin achieving optimal welfare outcomes. Please don't hesitate to contact me if you have questions. Best wishes, and remember, welfare is a responsibility for all who work in our industry and in our poultry companies. Thank you.
All right, so the second paper to be presented for this morning session is the disruption in chicken supply due to avian influenza outbreak. Our second speaker earned his Doctor of Veterinary Medicine at the University of the Philippines, Diliman, Quezon City, and master's degree in the University of California, Davis in the US. His MS is completed at the University of Guelph in Ontario, Canada. While in the US, he worked as a research associate in the University of California, as food animal intern in the University of Idaho in the US. He was a breeder farm epidemiologist in Magnolia Farms in Cabuyao, Laguna, Philippines in the early 1990s, before working as a quality assurance coordinator in Maple Leaf Poultry, also in Canada. He is currently a professor and extension poultry veterinarian in VA/MD College of Veterinary Medicine at the University of Maryland, College Park in the US. He is also a diplomate in American College of Poultry Veterinarians, a member of American Veterinary Medical Association, and past president of the American Association of Avian Pathologists. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Nathaniel L. Tablante.
Magandang araw sa inyong lahat. Good day, everyone. I'm Nathaniel Tablante, Dr. Nathaniel Tablante, Professor and Extension Poultry Veterinarian from the Virginia Maryland College of Veterinary Medicine at the University of Maryland in College Park. I have been here as a faculty member since 1997, so I'm on my 25th year of service as a faculty member focusing on disease prevention and control in poultry. I also teach courses and also do some applied research. My experience in poultry medicine dates back to my days in the Philippines as a poultry veterinarian for San Miguel Corporation at Magnolia Poultry. And I also moved on to Canada after that to become a poultry veterinarian there with Maple Leaf Foods. So without further ado, I have been requested by the Philippine College of Poultry Practitioners to talk to you about disruption in global chicken supply due to avian influenza outbreaks. And I'm very happy and thankful that I have this opportunity. I thank the organizers for inviting me to give this talk, and I will proceed with my presentation. So let me just give you a short outline of what I'm going to talk to you about today. First, I'll review poultry production with you, what is normally called vertical integration. I'm also going to review the principles of disease causation, which may or may not be new to you anymore since you are all veterinarians. But let's just start on the same page. Let's also review avian influenza itself. And I'll discuss avian influenza outbreaks in poultry, as well as the negative impacts of avian influenza outbreaks on poultry production, processing, and marketing, domestic and global supply of poultry. I'll also go over some lessons learned from past avian influenza outbreaks, key factors that led to these outbreaks, weak points and areas for improvement. And then I'll end with major challenges and efforts needed to ensure a stable supply of poultry. That is in line with the topic that you requested. So first, let's review poultry production in general. As you all know, and those of you working with what we call commercial poultry companies or integrators, this is a slide I borrowed from the National Chicken Council here in the US. This is the largest advocacy group for the broiler chicken industry. And as you can see, and you probably all know this, you have primary breeders, which are not company owned, but you buy these primary breeders and you pretty much send them over to your breeder farms, which are company owned, and they hatch. Of course, they produce hatching eggs that you send to your hatchery. And the hatchery, of course, hatches broiler chicks that you farm out to your contract growers. And your contract growers grow them until their market size or market age, and they're sent and collected by your trucks to processing plants that your company owns. And then some of these are sent to groceries, some to retailers or food service or fast food chains. Others are exported. Others are sent for further processing, and byproducts are sent to rendering plants. Of course, you have to supply your live birds with feed. That's why you have to buy these corn and soybeans. Sometimes they're imported. They're sent to a feed mill where you mix your feed. And of course, you feed all your live birds. So it is a very complex process, and everything has to fall into place. And at any point during the production cycle, in this cycle of poultry production, anything can go wrong, especially in live production, where avian influenza virus or other infectious agents may find a way to infect your live birds, and that is where problems begin. So let's go over the principles of disease causation. You may not think this is relevant, but it is. As you probably studied in veterinary school, we have what we call an epidemiologic triangle, which involves three main factors: the agent, the host, and the environment. For the sake of this presentation, we will focus on the agent, avian influenza virus, the host, which is the chicken, and the environment, which is the poultry house or poultry farm. At any point in this cycle, anything can happen. The agent has its own characteristics, so does the host. Its immune status in particular is very critical, and the environment in which it resides or exists. So let's see what may happen when things go wrong. In particular, avian influenza virus itself, which is an infectious viral disease caused by several subtypes of the type A strain of influenza virus, is very critical, very dangerous, because it occurs naturally among wild migratory waterfowl and shorebirds. These birds are natural reservoirs. They are asymptomatic, but they have the ability to transmit the virus to domestic poultry, such as chickens, turkeys, and ducks, as you can see here in this picture. So they shed the virus in their feces. They do not get sick. But if domestic poultry come into contact with that feces, infected feces, they can develop clinical signs of avian influenza with devastating consequences. So where does AI virus come from? Well, all known subtypes of influenza A viruses circulate among wild birds, especially wild migratory waterfowl such as ducks and geese. These are natural reservoirs of avian influenza virus, as I mentioned earlier. But the problem is domestic poultry, such as chickens and turkeys, are not natural reservoirs for avian influenza virus. So these domestic chickens and turkeys develop clinical disease when infected with AI virus. How does AI virus spread? One is through exposure to migratory waterfowl, as you can see in this picture on the left. Other means of spread is through exposure of commercial poultry to AI-infected backyard flocks. As you can see here in this picture, where we have a backyard flock here and there's a neighboring commercial farm here. So chickens from a backyard flock that are infected with avian influenza virus or other infectious disease may transmit that virus to a commercial poultry farm. Live bird markets, believe it or not, in the heart of New York City here in the US, there are what we call niche markets where live birds are sold by these dealers. And they, of course, get their stock from small scale poultry flocks all over the northeastern states, including New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Delaware. What happens is these live poultry markets have historically been known to harbor low pathogenic H5 and H7 viruses. In the process, when these infected equipment, for example, go back to the farms where the producer or dealer came from, those viruses can infect those birds that are on those farms. So that cycle of infection just goes on and on. But fortunately, because of strict measures, biosecurity measures, we have been able to control the spread of avian influenza to and from these live bird markets. Major means of spread of influenza virus is bird-to-bird contact through feces. but they can also be spread through aerosol droplets. And if you look at this picture on the left, this is a perfect example of that epidemiologic triangle, right? So AI virus can be spread through manure, equipment, vehicles, egg plats, crates, contaminated shoes and clothing of these personnel who are from a live haul crew. So think about avian influenza virus, the agent, the host, the chickens in this poultry house, and of course these people and equipment spreading the virus if it is indeed in this poultry house. There is a big potential for spread, right? Not to mention that wildlife vectors, although few and far between, can also spread this virus if there are infected carcasses that are improperly disposed on a farm. And of course, these wild animals can spread the virus to other farms. Let's go over past highly pathogenic avian influenza outbreaks in poultry for a minute. HPAI, IPAT-AI. First, in 1924 to 25 in the US, this was not known as avian influenza. They called it fowl plague because they didn't know anything about it. But eventually they learned a lot more. They found that it was an avian influenza virus that was causing this dreaded disease. In 83 and 84, IPAT H5N2 resulted in the loss of 17 million birds in the mid-Atlantic states here in the US. And as you can see, other countries have been infected over the years. There is really no discrimination for this virus. US, Mexico, Pakistan, you can see both developed and underdeveloped countries can experience outbreaks. The biggest outbreak in the US was just pretty recent in 2015 in the Midwestern states where H5N2, IPAT, resulted in the loss of 50 million birds. I would like to highlight the fact that in 1996-97, that outbreak of highly pathogenic H5N1 was the first reported outbreak of infection with H5N1 in humans. That was the first zoonotic case, which is a zoonotic disease, as you all know, is a disease that is transmitted from animals to humans. So first reported case of influenza, avian influenza in humans in Hong Kong and China was in 96-97, and that became known as bird flu. In the Netherlands in 03, that H7N7 outbreak resulted in the death of a poultry veterinarian who was a faculty member at Utrecht University when he responded to a disease outbreak of avian influenza on a farm. So as you can see, H5s and H7s, which are normally low pathogenic types, can mutate and become highly pathogenic, as you can see in all these cases over the years. So what is the impact, or what was the impact of the 2015 highly pathogenic H5N2 outbreak on the US poultry industry? This was known as the largest animal health emergency in the US. It wiped out about 10% of the entire layer inventory of the United States and reduced the national turkey inventory by 7.5%. That was, of course, reported by the USDA's Animal Plant Health Inspection Service Administrator, Dr. Kevin Shea. Also, the poultry industry reported that this outbreak killed more animals and caused more than any prior animal disease event in US history. In fact, the USDA destroyed 42 million layers and pullets and 7.5 million turkeys. They paid over $190 million in indemnity or compensation. It cost the US government approximately $550 million, according to Dr. John Clifford, who was at that time the Deputy Administrator of USDA's Animal Plant Health Inspection Service. In addition, losses from the outbreak took a mental toll on farmers and their employees. Thousands of people were out of work, jobless, while production had to stop because of depopulation and cleanup. Those who worked for farms or related businesses, such as feed suppliers, lost their jobs or portions of their incomes. And what's important and very related to our topic today is the loss of export markets for poultry and poultry products due to full or partial ban on poultry exports from the US. So what happens when you have an outbreak of avian influenza or even Newcastle disease, which are reportable or notifiable diseases, is your country's trading partners put a ban on your products immediately because they don't want to get infected. The other impact or implication of this outbreak was the shortage and the high cost of turkey products and table eggs. Because in the Midwest, the states like Iowa and Minnesota are mostly known for laying egg production and turkey production. So, with many depopulated flocks, the shortage was really a big problem, and that resulted not only in a short supply of these products, but also in the high prices. Some of the cases involved importing from other countries like Mexico and Canada just to pick up the slack because of the lack of these products. Going back to the 83-84 high-pat outbreak of H5N2 in the mid-Atlantic US, the lessons learned here from this outbreak was that this spread primarily through movement of people between farms, and also the movement of live and dead poultry, including while they were depopulating, contaminated transport trucks and coops, and contaminated feed trucks, eggs, feed, water, people, and equipment. The picture here on top is actually a carbon dioxide truck used for manufacturing soft drinks, but the poultry industry borrowed the CO2 truck to depopulate to gas with CO2 an infected flock here, as you can see in this picture. Also, movement of manure from infected farms was a major factor in the spread of this influenza outbreak. From the 2015 high-pat H5N2 outbreak, factors that contributed to virus transmission include insufficient application of recommended biosecurity practices, such as sharing of equipment between an infected and non-infected farm, employees moving between infected and non-infected farms, lack of cleaning and disinfection of vehicles moving between farms, and reports of rodents or small wild birds inside poultry houses. As you can see, a common recurring theme in all these outbreaks is lack of biosecurity or poor biosecurity. USDA, in fact, reported that the major lessons learned from this outbreak in 2015 was those involved needed to find ways to prevent mass destruction of birds by implementing biosecurity, improving immunity to influenza and other pathogens, improving biosecurity through practices such as wearing proper protective equipment or PPEs, personal protective equipment, rather than changes to farm buildings, and requiring each farm to have an emergency management plan. You would think that in a developed country like the US, they would have this in place. And most of the time they do. But the problem is you can put all these plans in a book or folder and forget about it and become complacent. And that is the problem if you do not frequently review these biosecurity procedures and actually test them and make sure that they are still viable. USDA also advised that there is supposed to be a requirement for each state to have an animal euthanasia or depopulation and disposal plan. They highly recommended it. The poultry industry, not to be outdone, said there is a need for a faster depopulation and disposal strategy, a faster repopulation strategy, because once you get hit and you've already taken care of depopulation and disposal to stop the spread of the virus, you have to make sure that after all has been said and done, you need to make sure that you get back on track into production. So repopulate after you are clear of the infection through regular testing, of course. They also wanted to have a viable vaccine, which is still to this very day much debated here in the US. The USDA is not particularly good at recommending. They kind of shy away from vaccination for AI, because the danger there is once you vaccinate for influenza, even influenza, you will test positive for it. And unless your trading partners or importing countries understand that the reason you're positive is because you're vaccinating, then you will not be able to export. So that is a problem. USDA also recommends a coordinated enhanced focus on biosecurity. Again, biosecurity just keeps showing up here as an issue. Clear and concise communication. You cannot get away from that. If you do not communicate properly between agencies, between farm companies, all those involved should be open and should be communicating regularly about the outbreak. The poultry industry also requested USDA to adjust their indemnity or compensation formula to better reflect lost production value. And let me just touch briefly on why indemnity or compensation is very important. Why? Well, because losses are incurred when you depopulate a poultry flock, right? And it's not always infected flocks. It could be also presumed to be infected flocks within a quarantine zone. If you do not compensate producers for their losses, it will be hard for them to get back on track. And of course, that will have a significant impact on the local economy as well as on export markets. So that's why indemnity is very important. So, what are the major challenges and efforts needed to ensure a stable supply of poultry during AI outbreaks? Well, first is ensuring the continuity of poultry production, processing, and distribution. Protecting the health and safety of poultry workers and consumers. And I say this because, as I mentioned earlier, avian influenza is now known to be a zoonotic disease, especially the H5 and H7 strains. They can jump from poultry to humans. So you need to make sure that your workers are safe through what? Wearing personal protective equipment. And if necessary, vaccinating, of course, they need to be vaccinated for seasonal human flu so that they are not going to become mixing vessels for influenza viruses that can mutate into highly pathogenic form. Preventing further spread of AI is a big issue here. You need to make sure that you prevent further spread through regular surveillance and monitoring, prompt depopulation and disposal of infected flocks. This is what USDA calls a stamping out policy. Their policy is to depopulate and dispose of flocks within 24 hours of positive diagnosis for avian influenza. Again, biosecurity, major critical issue here to prevent further spread of AI. And education and outreach. I have a personal stake in or interest in education and outreach, being an extension poultry veterinarian. And it is very important to make sure that you disseminate science-based information, but keep it simple so that people are not confused with high-tech language. Always make sure that you promote recovery efforts, okay? And this is done through indemnification or compensation, government and industry support, and diplomacy, transparency, and cooperation between animal health agencies and
The third paper to be presented is Complete Genome Sequencing and Identification of Transmission Routes of the H5N6 San Luis 2017.
Now, our third speaker earned his Doctor of Veterinary Medicine and master's degree in the University of the Philippines, Los Baños, Laguna. He completed his Doctor of Philosophy in Veterinary Science in Yamaguchi University in Japan. He is currently a UP scientist at the Department of Veterinary Clinical Sciences, College of Veterinary Medicine at UP Los Baños, Philippines. In addition to his current post, he also holds other positions outside UP, and these include Director of International Operations in Japan Poultry Industry Science and Technology Research Association, Molecular Epidemiologist at Research and Diagnostic Division, poultry products and quality control, also in Japan. He's also a visiting researcher at Osaka Prefecture University until now, independent livestock and poultry consultant, and attended postdoctoral training and research fellow, poultry products quality control. He is currently the World Veterinary Education in Production Animal Health OIE program for postgraduate certificate in poultry production. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome PCPP's very own Dr. Dennis V. Umali. Thank you.
Good day, everyone. First and foremost, we would like to congratulate the Philippine College of Poultry Practitioners, especially to Dr. Esme San Pedro, to Dr. Noel Lumbo, and all the members of the organizing committee, especially to Madam President Joy Literato, for organizing this wonderful and very successful event. It is a great privilege to give this presentation entitled Complete Genome Sequencing of the first H5N6 HPAI from Pampanga, Philippines in 2017. Now, without much further ado, let us begin. Our lecture outline for this morning will be as follows. First, we will have a brief review of HPA outbreaks in the Philippines. Then we will have an overview of H5N6 HPAI. Then we will be discussing the molecular characteristics of Pampanga, San Luis 2017 H5N6. And then we will have a discussion on the phylogenetic analysis and potential transmission routes of our local isolate. And then we will have an open forum. Now, this study will not be possible without the overwhelming support of all our collaborators, namely Dr. Hiromitsu Kato of PPQC Japan, as well as Dr. Toshihiro Ito, Dr. Hiroshi Ito of Totori University, also in Japan. And of course, our very own Dr. Ronnie Domingo, Dr. Arlene Bitiaco, Dr. Edna Felipe, Dr. Daphne Jorca, and Dr. Amado Antonio from the Bureau of Animal Industry, Department of Agriculture, as well as Dr. Angeles, Dr. Del Valle, and Dr. Camba from UPLB. Now, let us have a brief review on the HPA outbreaks in the Philippines. And as we all know, the first official case of HPA in the Philippines was reported in 2017 in San Luis, Pampanga. After several days, this was then followed by HPA cases in Jaén, Nueva Ecija, and also in San Isidro, Nueva Ecija. Based on the timeline of events, the case in San Luis was initially reported to the LGU in late July 2017. Laboratory confirmation was made at the Regional Animal Disease Diagnosis Laboratory, Region 3, and at the National Reference Lab at the Bureau of Animal Industry in Quezon City in the first week of August. After lab confirmation that the case was indeed an H5 influenza, mass culling and quarantine and surveillance protocols were immediately performed in accordance with the Manual of Procedures of the Avian Influenza Protection Program. But based on traceback information, it was reported that prior to the San Luis case, unusual mortalities were actually reported in the region as early as in April 2017. Based on the traceback information, unusual mortalities were observed in a 15,000 quail farm near the area, which resulted 200% mortalities in a span of 2 weeks. Napakabilis na, no? And interestingly, it was noted that under the quail farm are ducks that scavenges on wasted feeds and feces. And take note na sa ducks, no, mortalities of 71% were observed. Then starting around May to July 2017, unusual mortalities and morbidities were observed in layer farms, 6 layer farms in the area, characterized by facial swelling, respiratory signs, and variable mortalities. Samples were submitted to Regional Animal Disease Diagnostic Lab at Region 3 at San Fernando and also at the National Reference Lab in Bai. and in several private and university lab for parallel testing. Based on the OIE protocols, samples were then sent to the Australian Animal Health Laboratory for virus isolation and characterization. This is one of the affected farm in 2017. And based on the AIPP manual, the population was conducted within 1 kilometer radius of the bird flu outbreak, indicated by the red and the pink zone. And movement control was implemented within 7-kilometer radius, which is in the yellow zone. After the case in San Luis and in Jaén and San Isidro, several HPI cases were also noted in Cabiao, Nueva Ecija, in November 11 in Layers, and in 2020, also in Jaén, Nueva Ecija, on March 17 in Quails, in July 6 in San Luis, Pampanga, also in Layers. No? This farm and this farm are basically the same. No? So dalawang beses yan tinamaan ng bird flu. And yung pinaka-last na official report was in August 10 in Taytay Rizal involving native chickens and Muscovy ducks. Now, based on this table, since almost all cases in the Philippines is H5 and 6, so let us have a brief review on H5 and 6 AIB. As we all know, avian influenza, or AI, is a very, very old disease. Since late 1800s and early 1900s, andyan na yung avian influenza, no? But at that time, ang tawag sa kanya ay fowl plague. And mainly, yung circulating strains during those times was or were H1, H2, and H3, resulting to several pandemics such as the Spanish flu, the Asian flu, and the Hong Kong flu, among others. But unfortunately, in 1997, an H5, in the name of Egregious Guangdong 196, was able to cross the species barrier and infected humans in Hong Kong. Now, this is a great concern at that time because, as mentioned, all along exposure ng humans sa H1, H2, and H3 sa avian influenza, and suddenly meron tayong H5 from a goose. And if this H5 will gain the capability for human-to-human transmission, then it is possible that another human pandemic might occur. And fast forward by 30 years, despite the intensive depopulation protocols mandated by the OIE in cases of HIPAT AI, these are all the countries that reported the detection of the virus. Now, take note, aside from the geographic spread, something happened to the virus. Basically, it mutated. So, nag-mutate siya nag-mutate from the original Goose Guangdong, indicated as genotype 0, to the present. So, at least there are 19 major clades or lineages. And at present, right now, sa 2021, ang pinaka prevalent is itong tinatawag na clade 2.3.4.4. And within clade 2.3.4.4, meron yung 4 na groups. Group A, Group B, Group C, and Group D. All H5 and 8 are basically from Group A and Group B. And all H5 and 6 HPI basically from Group C and Group D. But some H5 and 6, especially yung mga recent na H5 and 6 ay nanggaling sa Group B. So these are the H5 and 8 derived H5 and 6. Now, based on the trajectory of clade 2.3.4.4, it is forecasted that itong red, so itong Group A and Group B, ang kanyang trajectory is from China papuntang Siberia to Europe and parts of America. And itong H5 and 6 under Group C and Group D, ang forecasted trajectory niya is from China papuntang East Asia and basically to Southeast Asia, including the Philippines. Now, let's discuss the origin of H5 and 6. So the first H5 and 6 was detected in Laos, then in Vietnam. Look at this table, But upon traceback, ito yun, So ito yung from Laos and Vietnam, but upon traceback, the chickens and ducks that were positive in Vietnam and Laos were actually imported from China. So originally, the origin of H5 and 6 is still in China. So dito yun, no? So clade dito, start ng clade 2.3.4 and dito siya, somewhere here. Based on genetic sequences, so these viruses were under group D, H5 and 6. And after this case, there were several detections in China afterwards. The first human case was reported in 2014. And then H5 and 6 was detected in Taiwan, Japan, and Korea, in the Philippines, and other European countries in 2017 under Group C. No? And more recently, itong mga Group B, H5 and 6 was reported starting in 2018, and ito yung mga papunta sa Europe. So itong original na H5 and 6, ito yung kanyang epicenter in Sichuan. This is a Group D, or in recent classification niya genotype 2. However, ito namang Group C, H5 and 6, ang epicenter niya ay Guangdong. So this ay under genotype 1. Now, from 2013, 2014 to present, there are at least 46 genotypes of H5 and 6 reported all over the world. So from the original G1 in Guangdong and G2 in Sichuan, China, nag-mutate ulit na nag-mutate through series of recombination reassortment, producing at least 46 genotypes. Main detection in domestic poultry was in 2014 to 2016, and yung peak detection wild birds was actually in 2017. Now, let us proceed with our case in the Philippines, and we will be discussing the molecular characteristics of the first HPAI in the Philippines designated as A, Pampanga, San Luis 2017, H5 and 6. And performing complete genome sequencing and phylogenetic analysis for HPAI is quite complicated as compared to other viruses, primarily because, as we can see in this diagram, no, the genome of AI is segmented. Ibig sabihin, hiwa-hiwala yung kanyang genome into 8 different segments. Whereas other viruses, such as, for example, corona, ang kanyang genome ay linear, no? So isang linya lang. And especially with linear genome, madaling ma-sequence kasi ma-sequence mo lang yung portion ng gene of interest, such as the spike gene. We can easily make conclusions on the genetic origin and properties of the virus. In case there will be mutations, the mutations ay straightforward, no? Kasi antigenic trip. So basically, accumulation of mutations over time. Whereas sa AI, mas komplikado dahil ang kanyang genome ay segmented, mataas yung probability ng antigenic shift or yung reassortment, wherein to fully elucidate the origin of the virus, you have to sequence all the 8 genomes kasi pwede mag-reassort or 2 or more viruses ay magko-combine. No? So mahirap masabi, straightforward kung saan yung origin niya kung di natin siya isi-sequence as a whole. Now, these are the raw sequence data for San Luis. Medyo mahaba and it's composed of several thousands of nucleotides. But to interpret this, no, so there are different ways. So basically, you have to convert them into amino acid, and based on the amino acid sequence, you can look for genetic markers such as this one. And each marker ay meron siyang corresponding phenotypic function and effects. So these are the markers, and these are the actual sequences kay San Luis, and these are the findings. No? So for HA gene, so we observed that San Luis is indeed an HPAI with this particular cleavage site, and this cleavage site is quite conserved sa mga clade 2.3.4 viruses, confirming na siya talaga ay from clade 2.3.4.4. And other than that, the HA gene of San Luis has preference for avian-like receptors, and there's absence of human-type receptor binding. So hindi siya ganun nakakahawa sa tao, no? But it has a potential transmissibility in ferrets. And for the NA gene, we found that San Luis is susceptible to oseltamivir. However, based on the PB2, San Luis 2017 has markers that may indicate that it has enhanced activity also in, aside from ferrets, is a mice. No? For the M1 gene, it was shown that San Luis is susceptible to amantadine and rimantadine. And similar with the previous gene, it has increased virulence in chickens and mice. So in summary, based on the molecular features, so San Luis 2017 is susceptible to common antiviral drugs such as amantadine, rimantadine, and oseltamivir. It has absent yung human type receptor binding, so the zoonotic potential of San Luis 2017 is quite low. However, potential transmissibility to ferrets and mice ay nandoon. No? So ingat pa rin kasi pwede siyang ma-transmit sa small mammals. Based on the nucleotide sequence of each gene, it was observed that San Luis belongs to the genotype 1.1.B genotype, and for the specific segment. No? So basically, combination ito ng G1.1.9 and G1.1. So ano ibig sabihin yan? So what is genotype H5 and 6? Genotype 1.1.B. Now, in our previous presentations in HPAI, we discussed that H5 and 6 is a triple reassortant virus. And we use several pictures to demonstrate how H5 and 6 was performed sa mga previous lectures natin. We started with the picture of this adorable person, and let us just call him the classic H5N1, which emerged in 1997, which then recombined with an H5N2 in the person of Dr. Cora Occidental, resulting to the generation of the progenitor H5N6. And finally, the progenitor strain recombined with an H6N6 from a duck in the person of Doc Roney, resulting to the generation of the H5N6 prototype strain or the genotype 1 strain. Kung titingnan natin, itsura pa lang ay talagang pathogenic na. Take note that this process is this one. So ito yan. And medyo isang master tools itong si genotype 1. And as mentioned previously, it recombined with a lot of other H5N6 from different countries, such as in China, resulting to the generation of the Chinese H5N6, in Korea for the Korean H5N6, and Japan for the Japanese H5N6. Dito tayo natapos sa mga previous presentations natin, but in the context of San Luis, so may part 2 ito, so hindi ito yung natapos, so may continuation ito. To describe the process on how San Luis 2017 was generated, let us focus sa strain na ito, and let us just call him genotype 1.1. Now, genotype 1.1 is basically a recombinant of genotype 1 with an N6 avian influenza from a duck in China. And in explaining the genetic constellation of San Luis, so on the left side, we have the genotype 1.1. And on the right side, we will be using this picture. So siya si Christine Crook. And this is genotype 1.1.9, which is a recombinant of G1 with the Eurasian H6 also from a duck. So Eurasian si Miss Crook, she's born na may Dutch na father and Chinese na mother, sa Eurasian, and siya ay ex-girlfriend ni Doc Esme San Pedro. So what will happen kung itong si G1.1 ay magre-recombine kay G1.1.9? So basically, we will generate the genotype H5N6 G1.1.B. And ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the genetic constellation of San Luis 2017. So kung pathogenic ang G1, ay mukhang mas pathogenic ito. So G1.1.B. Now, moving on, let us discuss the nucleotide sequence similarity and phylogenetic analysis of our local strain to infer on the potential epidemiological routes. So we compared it with the different H5N6 from all over the world in GenBank. And mahabang proseso, but in summary, the external genes and almost all the internal genes except the M gene, kasi si M gene ay G1.1, These are 98 to 100% similar to H5N6 strains from China, Hong Kong, Japan, Korea, and Vietnam in 2016 to 2017. However, the M gene ay 99.2 to 99.73% similar to H5N6 strains from Vietnam, Hong Kong, Korea, and Japan in 2014 to 2017. Take note that prior to 2017, itong genotype 1.1.B I detected primarily in ducks, wild birds, and environmental samples. However, in 2017, dun siya naumpisang ma-detect sa chickens in Vietnam and in the Philippines, in San Luis. No? Now, based on the phylogenetic analysis of each gene of San Luis, mahaba pa ring proseso, it just confirmed our earlier findings that the HA gene of San Luis 2017 belongs to the clade 2.3.4 group C, particularly yung group C na mainly isolated sa mga wild birds. All genes except the M gene ay genotype 1.1.9 and the M gene is genotype 1.1. No? The strain or the San Luis strain is closely related to H5N6 from ducks, wild birds, environmental samples, and chickens in China, Hong Kong, Japan, Korea, and Vietnam from 2014 to 2017. Now, let us discuss the possible potential transmission routes of our local isolate. In molecular epidemiology, no, so we have a technique called molecular clock, which is basically a technique that uses the mutation rate of biomolecules to reduce the time in prehistory when two or more life forms diverge. No? So basically, comparison ng different nucleotide sequence, we can estimate the most probable time of emergence. And for San Luis, no, yung kanyang TMCRA or time to most recent common ancestor, ang estimate is basically around late 2015 to early 2016. So ito yung mga individual genes, but in general, ito yun, sa kabuuan, ang kanyang probable emergence is in late 2015 to early 2016. So ano ibig sabihin yan? So putting everything in perspective, this is what probably occurred or what happened. So we have the genotype 1 that emerged in 2014. Then we have ito yung Laos na Vietnam and all along galing pala sa China. No? Then we have the genotype 1.1 and genotype 1.9 that emerged in early 2015 and 2016. Now during this time period, no, so late 2015 to 2016, nag-recombine itong dalawang ito, resulting to the generation of our genotype 1.1.B, and this genotype was then detected in the Philippines in 2017. Take note na majority nito, no, before 2017 was detected in wild birds. First time na detect sa Pilipinas, but in commercial chickens, as well as in Vietnam in commercial chickens. Now, how it arrived exactly to the Philippines is quite difficult to say, but based on the sequence data in the GenBank, what we know about G1.1.B ay yung kanyang epicenter was in Guangdong, and from Guangdong, no, in December 2015-2016, so ito yun, no, yung emergence niya. The virus was then detected in Japan, na-transmit sa Japan in 2016, and then in South Korea in 2016 also. So from Japan napunta sa South Korea, and also in 2017 na-detect sa Vietnam. Kung saan specific nang galing si San Luis 2017 is quite difficult to say due to limited data, but based on the available resources, it could be any of the following. No? Pwedeng galing sa China, pwedeng galing Korea or Japan. Mahirap masabi kung anong specific na bansa, no? But any of these three. But one thing is highly probable. No? So paano siya nakarating sa Pilipinas? And based on the available data, the virus probably arrived in the Philippines through migratory birds. Now, as we all know, wild birds are the natural reservoir of avian influenza, and the Philippines is part of the East Asian Australasian Flyway. And within the East Asian Australasian Flyway, nandun yung Candaba Swamp, which is a major hotspot ng migratory birds. and San Luis, ito yun, no? It's actually around 10 to 20 kilometers lang from Candaba Swamp. No? Malapit na malapit, pwedeng lakarin. And moreover, we know ng AI is seasonal prevalence, especially in wild birds. Although in Europe and East Asia, especially sa commercial poultry, mga peak detection ng AI is during the wintering months. But in the context ng wild birds at the breeding site, no, peak detection ng AI is actually during July and August, when there is an increase in number ng mga immunologically naive juveniles. Take note that San Luis 2017 was reported in August 2017. So saktong-sakto sa seasonal prevalence. Now going back to the Candaba Swamp, meron tayong tinatawag na resident birds. Ito yung mga yon. Saka meron tayong tinatawag na regular migratory birds. But suddenly starting 2010 and specifically in 2016, notable new bird species were reported in Candaba. Particularly itong si Tundra bingus and itong si Tundra swan. And also in 2016, no, itong teal, spoonbill, and falcated duck were detected sa Candaba Swamp. So anong significance na ito? So kung babalik tayo sa phylogenetic tree, so interestingly, closely related sa ating Pampanga San Luis, itong mga strains na ito. No? So si bingus Ishikawa, Tundra swan, and also teal, no? 99.60% similarity. So anong ibig sabihin? So although circumstantial evidence lang, no? But based on the sequence data, it is highly likely that San Luis 2017 may have found its way to the Philippines through the overshooting of migratory birds from their regular wintering areas. So bakit nag-overshoot? Napakaraming reasons, probably due to inclement weather conditions and changing climatic patterns. And it could also be the reason kung bakit 1997 unang na-report ang H5N1 and sa tagal-tagal ng panahon, ngayon lang tayo nakadetect ng HPI sa Pilipinas. Because probably starting in 2010, especially in 2016, migratory birds that are known to carry the virus ay nagsimula mag-overshoot and starting to arrive in the Philippines. So one possible reason, no? And the overshooting of wild birds is a potential risk factor that may result to the introduction and transmission of AI to local wild aquatic birds, domestic poultry, and the environment. Now, in summary, San Luis belongs to genotype 1.1b. Its zoonotic potential is quite low. However, it is susceptible to regular antiviral drugs. And for the San Luis case, no, it is quite difficult to say exactly which country it originated, pwedeng Japan, Korea, or China, but it is highly probable that it arrived in the Philippines through the overshooting of migratory birds. And specifically in San Luis and other cases after San Luis, involvement of ducks was greatly noted. And take note, no, so major risk factor ng AI, at least for San Luis, is yung commingling ng ducks, especially yung free-range ducks and commercial poultry. Second major risk factor is nung nagka-detect na is yung mga emergency harvest, no, resulting to further spread of the virus. Now, as for the recommendation, if we will look at the entire picture, no, of course, my broiler, layer, breeder, game fowl, and commercial poultry, but in the context of AI, so one poultry, one industry. So lahat tayo ay apektado kung magkakaroon tayo ng malaking outbreak, no? So if we will compare it with ASF, kung sa ASF ang umubos sa swine industry nagsimula because of swill feeding, hindi naman apple to apple, no? But yung counterpart nun is basically itong commingling of wild birds and commingling of ducks to our commercial poultry. It is a great spark that could start an ASF-like outbreak in the Philippines. For the wild birds, we cannot do anything about it, but for the ducks, it's quite difficult to discriminate against free-ranging. Siyempre, naghahanap buhay lang naman yung mga mag-itik natin, but probably in the future, no, if we can regulate yung free-ranging ng ducks, so prohibit it in certain areas or certain times of the year, so it may be a good start. And it will be best if we can always include our duck farmers in technical conferences such as this one. No? So we have to educate and empower them. But for the meantime, sa commercial poultry side, no, what we can control is, again, biosecurity, especially the commingling of ducks and other poultry species. So never ever let ducks enter our farms as well as yung mga wild birds. No? So that's all. Thank you, and I hope may natutunan kayo sa umagang ito. Salamat.
The fourth paper to be presented for this morning plenary session is Infectious Bronchitis Virus and its Many Phases, an overview on the IBV serotypes and its disease preventions.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Umali, for continuously working on this very significant poultry disease and sharing this to us. Yes, as mentioned, the next paper will be on infectious bronchitis virus and its many phases. Our speaker earned his BS degree in molecular biology and biotechnology in 2008, very young. She graduated with flying colors as summa cum laude and had her master's degree in the University of the Philippines in 2011. She took her doctorate degree in infectious diseases in the University of Georgia in Athens, Georgia, USA, where she receives various awards. And let me read those awards. First, Best Postdoctoral Oral Presentation in College of Veterinary Medicine, also in the University of Georgia. She also had the Best Oral Presentation in Southern Conference on Avian Diseases and received the Merck Animal Health High Quality Poultry Science Award for Latin America by Merck Animal Health. During those years, she works as postdoctoral researcher in the University of Georgia and currently is a postdoctoral researcher in the United States Department of Agriculture, Agricultural Research Service since 2017. Prior to her US stints, she was University Research Associate at the University of the Philippines until 2011. She is also a member of the American Society of Microbiology, American Society of Avian Pathologists, and American Society of Virology. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the very young Dr. Christina Laura M. Layson. Thank you.
Good day, everyone. I'm Christina Layson. Thank you for joining me in this talk, and we'll be talking about infectious bronchitis virus and its many phases. So just a brief outline of what we'll be talking about in the next half hour or so. First, I'll give you a brief background on infectious bronchitis virus, and we'll talk about the different serotypes and genotypes. We'll also talk about the diagnostic tools that are used to determine whether or not infectious bronchitis is present, and also distinguish between different serotypes and genotypes. And then finally, we'll be talking about infectious bronchitis as a disease. So what are different clinical manifestations of IBV? And finally, we'll end with the story of the serotype that's called DMV 1639. So first off, what is infectious bronchitis virus? Or some people call it IBV. Some people also call it bronchitis virus. So IBV is a positive sense single-stranded RNA genome that's enveloped, and it's a member of the coronavirus family from the genus Gamma coronavirus. And so IBV is a cousin or kind of a distant cousin of SARS-CoV-2, and it's in a different genus. So SARS-2 is in the beta coronavirus genus, but IBV, it's in the gamma coronavirus. And what's special about IBV is that it's a highly diverse virus, and we'll talk more about that in the coming slides. And so for IBV and also for SARS-2, you may have also heard the spike protein. So what's special about the spike protein? This protein in particular is on the outside of the virus. And so it's represented here by the yellow bulby structure that's on the diagram at the bottom of your screen. And so this particular protein is responsible for attachment of the host cells. So you can think of it as the Velcro or the sticky part that sticks onto the virus's target host cells. And because it's found on the outside of the virus particle, it's also a major target of the immune system. So you can think of it in this example, antibodies, which is represented here as the Y figure that's purple. And this, if antibodies are able to bind to spike, then they can potentially neutralize or eliminate the virus. And what's so special about infectious bronchitis virus and its spike is that, in particular for the infectious bronchitis virus, it's a really diverse. So there's a lot of different spikes that are known, leading to many different serotypes around the world. And so what is particularly a serotype? So when we say it's a serotype, it's a group of viruses that are antigenically distinct from each other. And what that really means is that there's really little or no cross-protection between different serotypes. And so there's an example here of a blue virus or a blue serotype and a red serotype, IVV. So if you have antibodies that are recognize the blue serotype, then these same antibodies will not be able to recognize the red serotype. And in this way, we can see that if you have immune response against the blue serotype, then you probably won't be protected against the red serotype. And examples of different serotypes are the Massachusetts, the Georgia 08, the 491, and the QX serotypes, which you might have heard of in your practice. And so I also wanted to talk about the different lineages of IBV. And so the genetic lineages are IBV is based also on the spike, but just a portion that's called the S1 spike. And this particular portion is actually found on the outermost part of the protein. And so this spike gene can be represented by 6 different genotypes with 32 distinct lineages. And most of the infectious bronchitis viruses that we know are actually part of group 1 with 27 different lineages. And you can refer to the specifics in the paper that's on your right, on the right of your screen. And so usually the genotypes are associated with serotypes, but that is not always the case. So when we say usually, if you have 2 viruses that are very similar to each other, most likely they might be of the same serotypes, but to really definitively know whether or not a virus is the same genotype, you will have to do the sequencing. And to definitively know if a virus is another serotype, then you have to do the serology. So really testing, doing the proper tests will give you the definitive answer of what type of infectious bronchitis virus you're dealing with. And so for controlling for IBV, we have 3 major measures that we can use. The first one is biosecurity, which involves the use of PPE, the use of cleaning and disinfection, and other non-pharmaceutical measures. We can also use diagnostics, so looking at whether infectious bronchitis is becoming a problem in the field, or also determining what kinds of serotypes and genotypes are present in our area and what kind of bronchitis virus is causing the problem. And then finally, we can also use vaccination, and there are 2 main types: the live attenuated vaccines, which are able to replicate in the bird, so sort of mimicking the actual infection with a virulent infectious bronchitis virus. And another type of vaccine is an inactivated vaccine or a killed vaccine, which is the infectious bronchitis virus, but it's no longer infectious, but is also still able to elicit immune responses. So I also wanted to briefly talk about what kinds of tools can we use to determine if infectious bronchitis is present and what kind of infectious bronchitis virus is causing the problem. So there are 3 main types, which the first one being the classical one, the using virology with isolation and characterization of the virus. And the other 2 are more molecular based, meaning that we're using parts of the virus, looking either at the nucleic acid or the genetic material, or looking at the proteins or the antibodies that are generated against the viral proteins with the serologically based methods. And I also wanted to mention that technologies are always getting better and always getting cheaper. And I think the pandemic has also spurred some new technologies. So I'm really excited about that. So don't be afraid to use your diagnostic tools. So first off, with the classical isolation. So in this case, you would get a sample from the bird. It might be a swab, it might be some cecal tonsils that can also be done. And the infectious bronchitis virus is grown up in embryonated eggs. And once you've isolated the virus, other methods can be used to characterize it. So you can either determine the serotype or you can also determine the genotype. For nucleic acid-based methods, this particular method uses the genetic material of the pathogen. So just like humans or other animals, viruses also have genetic material. And in the case of IBV, it's an RNA genome. So whereas for humans and for animals, it's a DNA genome. Right. And so this is really important. For nucleic acid methods, you can both detect viable and non-viable pathogens. So that really means is that the presence of the nucleic acid doesn't necessarily mean that there's viable virus there. Although generally, if you have more nucleic acid, the chances of having an infectious particle there is more likely, but again, it's not 100%. Okay, and then the nucleic acid-based method actually take advantage of the uniqueness of the gene sequences of the different pathogen. And so, for example, here, if you have the two different serotypes of IBV, they can actually be pretty similar, but there are just slight small changes that we can use to determine whether or not the different viruses are actually different serotypes. So if you have a sharp eye here, there's actually two bases that are different between serotype 1 and serotype 2. And then these sequences are really different from other pathogens. For example, here, Salmonella, which has a completely different sequence. And we use that uniqueness to our advantage using the different methods. And so generally for nucleic acid-based methods, we have first quantitative real-time PCR, which is probably your cheapest method if you want to distinguish different serotypes or genotypes. And this method is highly sensitive because it uses a PCR reaction, and the diagram is at the bottom below. And this reaction exponentially amplifies small amounts of nucleic acid, and that's why it's very sensitive. And this quantitative PCR, depending on how it's designed, can also distinguish between different serotypes and also between different genotypes, depending on what primers and probes are present, or depending on what the availability of the tests are. And then finally, a little bit more expensive on the expensive side is the actual sequencing of the spike protein, or in some cases, actually the whole genome. So if there are methods for that. And so this method, sequencing the actual genome, provides more information than quantitative PCR, really, but it is more expensive. So that's just the trade-off that you have there. And then finally, for our third method, we also have serological methods, which use the antigen and antibody interaction for the detection of either the antigen, so a part of the virus, or antibodies against bronchitis. So this method can be used to distinguish between serotypes, either the antigen or the chickens that have been vaccinated or exposed to different serotypes of IBV. So I just wanted to, on this slide, I just wanted to mention here that the use of different diagnostic tools really depends on where you are in the life history of a chicken and an infection with infectious bronchitis virus. So for virus isolation, nucleic acid, and ELISA for the antigen, so ELISA for the virus proteins, these methods are used early in infection, so actually before or during the disease, clinical disease, right? As is represented here at the diagram. Whereas if you look for antibodies against bronchitis, these actually are found at least 2 weeks after infection and can persist for a couple more weeks or perhaps months as well. So just make sure that you're using the right diagnostic tool for the question you are asking so that you're getting the appropriate answers that you need. Okay, so finally, the last part of this talk, we'll be talking about infectious bronchitis as a disease. And so infectious bronchitis virus generally does not cause high mortality. It does cause a respiratory disease. And for this reason, it's an economically important disease in poultry. Its pathogenesis is usually ciliostasis in the trachea. And what that means is that the cilia, or the beating fingers of the cells in the trachea, stops beating. And what happens is that there is mucus accumulation and more susceptibility to secondary bacterial infections. And in this case, we can also see necrosis of the epithelia of the trachea. The clinical signs of infectious bronchitis virus can be respiratory disease, and which is usually represented by rales, or a very distinct chicken cough. I'm sure many of you are aware of. And it can also cause air saculitis in cases of secondary bacterial infection in the air sacs of the chickens. In layers and breeders, it can cause also poor egg production, so either low production or misshapen eggs. And in some strains, bronchitis virus can also cause nephritis. And usually for this, if the kidney lesions are severe enough, it can cause high mortality because of the kidney failures in the chickens. So a disease talk will not be complete without pictures. So here are just some pictures that I got from the Avian Disease Manual of the AAAP. And on your left is a picture of a chick that is infected and has conjunctivitis, or swelling around the eyes, especially at the top of the eyes. And then on your right are misshapen eggs, and also like soft shell eggs. That's due to an infection with IBV. In cases of IBV that cause nephropathogenesis or infects the kidney, you can see swelling of the kidney and also accumulation of the urates. And so in this case, this is the picture on your left. It's actually pretty severe and can cause kidney failure in some chickens and cause death. In respiratory cases, on the other hand, if you have secondary infections, it's possible that you will see air saculitis, or the bubbles you can see around the air sacs. And if you have the ability to culture the bubbly stuff, you'll probably get some bacteria out of that. And so I also wanted to mention that IBV is a very typical respiratory virus in most cases. And it can look like other pathogens that also cause other mild respiratory forms, such as velogenic Newcastle, infectious laryngotracheitis, and low pathogenic avian influenza. And if bacterial infection is present, IBV can look like infectious coryza or mycoplasma. And if the strain that you're dealing with is nephropathogenic, it can cause infectious bursal disease, or it can also be mycotoxicosis and other toxicities. So just make sure that you know what you're dealing with. And really the best way that we can distinguish different pathogens or different syndromes from each other is using the diagnostic, making sure that you're actually dealing with what you think you are dealing with. So just a short plug there. And so I wanted to end with a story of DMV 1639, which is a serotype that has been present in the continental Northern America. And DMV stands for the Delmarva, so Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia region. And for this reason, it was first isolated in the Delmarva Peninsula in 2011. And the disease presentation of this particular outbreak was nephropathogenic. And there's a representation there, a little picture of a chicken that has pretty severe swelling of the kidneys on your right. And so when they isolated the virus, they infected chickens in the lab. What they see is that kidney lesions, including interstitial nephritis, when they looked under the microscope. And when they sequenced the virus, it seemed to be related to other nephropathogenic strains from Pennsylvania in the late 1990s. So again, like this appears that this particular virus reemerged from the 1990s. And so they were able to control this outbreak using vaccination and other non-pharmaceutical interventions. And that was the end of that. But in 2016 and 2017 in Canada, there was a spike of IBV cases that started in 2016 and then eventually rose in 2017. And these cases were associated with a false layer syndrome. So in other words, the chickens look fine, the hens look normal on the outside, but when you open them, they have large distinct oviducts. And so this causes them not to lay any more eggs. And there was a significant drop, or up to 20% drop in egg production for these flocks. And this particular syndrome was associated with early infection with DNV 1639. And in this outbreak, the Canadian folks did biosecurity again and vaccination, and were able to control the DMV 1639 outbreak. So we can see here, same virus, same serotype, I should say, the same serotype, but different disease presentation depending on the timing or depending on where the outbreak occurred. And so the saga doesn't end there, right? Of course. And so in 2019, DMV 1639 was detected in the United States this time. But this time, the disease presentation was different. It was not nephropathogenic. It was not associated with the false layer syndrome, but it was respiratory, like a classic IBV virus. And so also the affected flocks were mainly broilers and broiler breeders. So a different type of bird compared to the Canadian outbreak. This particular outbreak may or may not affect egg production, and there was really no evidence for kidney lesions. So it appears that, even though it's the same serotype, the disease presentation can be different. And so for this particular outbreak, the folks in the US are using the Georgia 08 vaccine along with other vaccinations. And because it's been shown to offer some cross protection in clinical trials. And we will see how this goes. Hopefully they'll be able to control this, this particular serotype, and we'll go back to normal. And so hopefully, just to sum everything up, I've imparted with you that infectious bronchitis virus is an economically important pathogen. And what's special about infectious bronchitis virus is really many serotypes exist, and tests can be done to distinguishing them. So you can either do nucleic acid-based tests, or you can also do serological-based tests. Infectious bronchitis virus can have a really varied disease presentation, can be either respiratory, can be associated with lower egg production, or can also be nephropathogenic. And this was exemplified with the case of DMV 1639 from 2011 to the present. And so hopefully I'd convince you that IBV is a moving target. It's always changing. It's so diverse. And that's why it's also fun to work with. It's also why I work with it. But it's also important to be vigilant. And so I hope I've shared with you this knowledge and be able to apply it in your practice. So thank you so much for your attention. It's been great that you're here with me today. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me at the email below. And hopefully I'll get to meet you and talk to you in person soon. I'll see you later. Bye.
The fifth paper to be presented for this morning plenary session is Monitoring of Antimicrobial Use in Poultry Production, a stewardship approach towards the preservation of antimicrobials.
Thank you very much, Dr. Layson, for that very impressive and detailed presentation of IBV. This brings us to the finale of this morning's session. To introduce to you Our fifth speaker, she definitely is not the least, and she earned her Doctor of Veterinary Medicine at the University of the Philippines in Los Baños and had her graduate diploma on Avian Medicine and Pathology in Photobiology and Master of Science from Ontario Veterinary College, University of Guelph in Canada. Our speaker is currently a veterinary epidemiologist of Public Health Agency of Canada since 2009 until today. Prior to this current post, our speaker is a manager of quality assurance and veterinary services of Maple Leaf Foods, lead veterinarian, disease prevention, poultry in Ontario Ministry of Agriculture for Food and Rural Affairs. She was also consultant on AMR, coordinator for the Fleming Fund of Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. Let me read also some of her associations and memberships. Canadian Association of Poultry Veterinarian and Regional Associations, where she is also a past president. American Association of Avian Pathologists, Northeastern Chapter, and the diplomate of the American College of Poultry Veterinarians. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Agnes Agunos.
Hi, everyone. My name is Agnes Agunos. I'm a veterinary epidemiologist from the Public Health Agency of Canada. I'm an avian pathologist and epidemiologist by training, and I work with the Canadian Integrated Program for Antimicrobial Resistance Surveillance, or CPRS, of the Public Health Agency of Canada. The title of this lecture is Monitoring of Antimicrobial Use in Poultry Production, a Stewardship Approach Towards the Preservation of Antimicrobials. At the end of these lectures, attendees will be familiarized with antimicrobial resistance, AMR in short, the difference between AMR versus antimicrobial residues, basic AMR mechanisms, and antimicrobial use stewardship. And attendees will also learn basic methodologies for monitoring AMU. The presentation or this lecture is divided into 4 subtopics. One is the difference between antimicrobial resistance and antimicrobial residues. Second is the dissemination of AMR and residues in the animal-environment-human interface. Third, basic principles of AMR mechanisms. And last, antimicrobial use metrics and indicators. So we'll be learning a little bit of math in the last section. First, let's review the 2 types of hazards, the residues and resistance. Antimicrobial residue is a type of chemical hazard. This is when an antimicrobial drug or a metabolite is present in the meat, the egg, or milk of an animal. This is detected using ELISA and a method known as liquid chromatography and mass spectrophotometry, or LCMS. The intervention is to observe the withdrawal period, and the residue should be less than the maximum residue limit, or MRL, to be considered safe for human consumption. MRL is expressed in microgram per kilogram of meats or microgram per liter of milk. The Codex Alimentarius maintains a database of MRL for the commonly used veterinary drugs in livestock and fish. The main issue is antimicrobial resistance. It's a type of antimicrobial hazard. And this is when a resistant bacteria or the genes are isolated from the meat, the milk of an animal. The test methods are bacterial isolation, so we need to isolate the organism and conduct antimicrobial susceptibility testing. This hazard poses a much serious public health threat because the dissemination of resistant bacteria and genes continues beyond the residue withdrawal period. A simple explanation here is that the bacteria multiplies and persists whenever the condition allows them to grow. Unlike residues, they could be disintegrate in the environment and there's no chance that they could multiply. The intervention is prudent use of antimicrobials and antimicrobial stewardship. And we will talk a little bit about these terminologies later on in the presentation. This shows the cycle of contamination and recontamination of residues and AMR. So a little bit of introduction here or guidance. So the red means the dispersion of residues into the environment. The yellow circles pertains to the dissemination of AMR organisms, and the blue circles are compartments where antimicrobials are used. The residues that are depicted here in reds can move from one compartment, so it starts from manufacturing companies. The antimicrobials are consumed by people as well as by our livestock animals or backyard or free-ranging animals. The residues could then subsequently spread by manure here or onto the crops and also into wastewater or water runoff from agriculture, making their way to the fishery sector. It can also spread from all other phases of the environment that are adjacent to the compartments where the antimicrobials were used. Antimicrobial resistance, on the other hand, depicted in yellow circle again, is when resistant organisms emerge or develop de novo in the compartments where the antimicrobials are used. For example, by humans, animals, livestock animals that are free-ranging, or backyard animals, as well as in fish and a little bit in aquaculture. So these resistant organisms multiply in these compartments. And again, there's some, we cannot establish the directionality of the spread between these compartments, but eventually they make their way to the food chain, and we are again exposed to these antimicrobial resistant organisms. So it becomes a self-perpetuating nature of AMR contamination and recontamination. So this flyer is from the World Health Organization, the WHO, list of critically important antimicrobials for human medicine. It shows a simpler depiction of the food pathway compared to the previous slide that I showed a while ago. So when healthy animals are treated with antimicrobials that are critically important to human medicine, the resistant bacteria can emerge, then spread to their immediate environment as well as in people, and then eventually enter the food chain. When the food are handled without consideration to common food safety practices like processing and common sense in handling meat or any products that are probably contaminated with resistant organism, and then could lead to human infection. Now, when a sick animal is treated with antimicrobials, for example, of ciprofloxacin or colistin, to which the bacteria is resistant to, then it will be more difficult to treat that infection when the clinically sick individual is infected with that resistant organism. So caution in using these particular antimicrobials in human medicine is important. There is a global call to limit the use of high priority critically important antimicrobials in animal production. I'm just going to slightly enlarge this a little bit. As you can see here, the critically important antimicrobials are divided into highest priority and high priority. And some of these should not be used in animal or veterinary medicine because these are very important or highest priority in human medicine. For example, the macrolides, polymyxins, and the quinolones. High priority antimicrobials includes aminoglycosides, as well as the penicillins, phosphonic acid derivatives or phosphomycins, and some other related antimicrobials. We'll start off with some definitions to make sure that we're all on the same page. Antimicrobial and antibiotic, and Dr. John Prescott defines it as a substance of natural, semi-synthetic, or synthetic origin which kills or inhibits microbial growth, yet results in minimal or no damage to the host. Although many people use the words antimicrobial and antibiotic interchangeably, technically, antibiotics only refer to those agents that are naturally produced. So these are some photos taken from establishment that I visited in one of my trips in Indonesia. And the same, the premise that sells these antimicrobials also has a layer farm and a fish pond and a feed mill. So the following are the reasons for the use of antimicrobials in animals. And these are just the simplistic description of the uses of antimicrobials. And there's many definitions out there. For example, the OIE has their own definitions as well as the WHO. Anyway, treatment is the use of antimicrobials in sick animals. Prevention is the use of antimicrobials in healthy animals. And growth promotion is the use of antimicrobials also in healthy animals, but a lower dose may lead to improved growth rate or production performance. AMR occurs when a normally susceptible bacterium grow in the presence of antimicrobials at levels which normally suppress growth. We often call it bacteriostatic, or kill the bacterium, bactericidal. The minimum inhibitory concentration, or MIC, is the lowest concentration of an antimicrobial at which the bacteria is inhibited from growing. As you can see at the bottom of your screen, the circles represent different dilutions or concentrations of antimicrobials. So this is a technique called broth microdilution. So the green color indicates growth, so the lower concentration, and the white or clear indicates no growth. In addition to MIC, we also have breakpoints, a terminology used in AMR and AST testing, that are set for specific antimicrobial and bacteria combinations. So that has to be specific to that bacteria and antibiotic. So the breakpoint is the dilution or concentration that if the bacteria grows above it, it means that bacteria is resistant to that antimicrobial. In this example, if the breakpoint is between 2 and 4, then the bacteria would all be classified as susceptible because no bacteria grew above the breakpoints. However, if the breakpoint was between 0.5 and 1, as shown here, then any isolates that grow in the 1 dilution above would be classified as resistant. So in this case, the organism is deemed as resistant. In simpler language, this is how AMR is developed. So bacteria can develop genes for resistance through mutation. They can pick up genes for resistance from other bacteria, and the genes responsible for resistance may cluster together and move between bacteria as a unit. In case you are interested, these are again some of the illustrations of transferable resistance, and many references are available out there that can be accessed online. In short, bacterial transformation, as shown in figure A, is the genetic uptake of free extracellular naked DNA transferred to a host cell. Transformation is happening in certain genera only, so it's not widespread. It involves the genetic transfer via bacterial uptake of naked DNA and carrying resistance genes, which has some homology, and then that naked DNA, that virus, the plasmid, is incorporated into the bacterial virus and transferred into a different organism. And then the bacterial conjugation is probably the most popular of the transferable resistance. And the donor bacterium makes a sex pilus, simply sex pilus, which attaches to a recipient cell and transfer the R plasmid. And this R plasmid may contain multiple genetic elements. Let's move on to AMU and AMR situation in the Philippines and what is the current state of science in the country. Why do we need to measure antimicrobial use here in the country? Surveillance of antimicrobial use as well as resistance is one of the prioritized areas indicated in the Global Action Plan and AMR, as well as the Philippine Action Plan to combat AMR. So they are both indicated in these two documents, the global as well as the national plans. There are a few research projects conducted in animals in the country so far. So in the next few slides, we will examine some of this. So the research that I will be presenting in the next few slides were conducted in Luzon. And we all know that this, in central Luzon, I mean, this is a major poultry and swine producing region in the Philippines. And chicken and pork are also the favorite meat commodity among Filipinos. AMR surveillance program is in its early stages of implementation, and NMIS is the responsible agency for that particular task to implement components of the AMR action plan. This study is in broiler chicken farms, and selective media was used to recover ESBL. ESBL is extended spectrum beta-lactamases. So these are enzymes that break down and destroy some commonly used antibiotics, for example, the penicillins and cephalosporins. So it makes them ineffective for treatment. There were diverse ESBL genotypes as shown here in this figure. We can see CTXM, TEM, and SHB genotypes. And most concerning as well is the detection of this different CTXM genotypes in chickens. And the public health concern is when people are infected with these organisms from exposure, consumption of contaminated meat products, then that becomes a serious public health concern. And similarly in pigs, the same researchers also detected multiple antimicrobial resistance phenotypes. And as you can see here, there are some organisms that contain at least 5 different antimicrobial resistance. For example, penicillins, cephalosporins, aminoglycosides, and fluoroquinolones. Only in one isolate contains these different antimicrobials. And also, some of the isolates exhibited MCR1. It's the mobilized colistin-resistant gene that confers plasmid-mediated resistance to colistin. And as shown in the previous slide, colistin is a high-priority, critically important antimicrobial and is one of the number of last resort antibiotics for treating gram-negative infections in humans. As much as possible, these should not be used in animals at all. Now, as evidenced by these research projects, antimicrobial resistance to zoonotic foodborne pathogens are widely disseminated in the Philippines, and these are oftentimes detected in the most frequently consumed meat products. And the high prevalence of resistance to WHO's HPCIAs is quite concerning. And these initial studies serve as the smoking gun, meaning that there is a serious AMR as a public health issue in the country that we need to address. Moving on to the information and the antimicrobial agents to which resistance is expressed. So although we don't have a surveillance system that shows that these are extensively used in the country, there are many products that are available that it can be accessed by farmers, a backyard farmer, a commercial farmer, or basically anyone in an agricultural or veterinary shop without a veterinary prescription, so meaning it's over-the-counter use. And according to PVET, the drug directory in the Philippines, there are many products approved for use in animals that are of WHO's high priority, critically important antimicrobials. And these are just the examples. The combination drugs also, maybe a combination of colistin and the quinolone or maybe another drug is quite concerning because we don't know what's the withdrawal period, what are the public health risks associated with that combination, like the dosing interval and all other aspects of pharmacokinetics, pharmacodynamics that we don't know with these products. This is coming out of a research project. It shows that these are the top 5 frequently used antimicrobials in chickens. And these again are the quinolones, and polymyxins are highest priority, critically important antimicrobials, the same with swine. So antimicrobial use monitoring is a component of antimicrobial stewardship, meaning that we cannot improve what we cannot measure. So let's examine what is the definition of antimicrobial stewardship. So this is the term increasingly used. You will see this a lot in flyers or advocacy materials about AMR. And it is used to describe the multifaceted approaches required to sustain the efficacy of antibiotics to minimize the emergence of resistance. And prudent use of antimicrobials pertains to the optimal selection of the drug. So you have to select the drug that is appropriate for that bacteria. So that's why you need to determine what is the infecting organism or the etiology of the disease, the dose, and duration of antimicrobial treatments, along with reduction of inappropriate and excessive use as a means of achieving the best clinical outcome while slowing the emergence of AMR. So stewardship, again, is a multi-pronged approach, and we need to bring all these pieces together for an informed antimicrobial stewardship. There are many aspects of stewardship of antimicrobial use that can be measured, and we need to understand all these different exposure parameters or metrics. So if we are to measure antimicrobial use on farm or in our own company, in our own practice, what resources do we need? So the development of antimicrobial use metrics and indicators substantially advanced in the last decade. And again, this is in response to the global call to contain AMR. And there are many resources available out there online, including research studies from across the world. This is one example, the review document published by the Acting Consortium, and it gives you a lot of options on what metrics or indicators to use depending on your circumstance or type of data and what is more convenient for you to collect. There are some terminologies used in AMU monitoring, and I mentioned this previously. Metric is also called the unit of measurement, or UM. For example, these are the milligram active ingredient, the number of days treated, number of DDT VATs. So something that you can measure or quantify. An indicator is a parameter, so the unit of measurement, which becomes the denominator, divided by the animal population to standardize the use data. So the denominator. So the indicator is a metric in relation to a denominator. So both metric and indicator are crooked measuring sticks, but when applied consistently over time, it could measure any antimicrobial use reduction efforts that are implemented, for example, with your producer or farmer, in your company, or nationally. These are potential sources of data for veterinarians. As a poultry vet, I think that you can access flock records. You have your own veterinary prescription records or dispensation, their delivery receipts. If this goes with your feed or your technical service people, so you have those information as well as purchase records. Now, moving on to the actual application of these metrics. One, the simplest metric is the frequency measures or count base. Number one, it tells us how extensively the use practices across the country. For example, what's the proportion or the number of farms or flocks that were medicated with, say, amoxicillin or enrofloxacin, and how many rations, for example, in a given farm were medicated during that flock cycle. Number two, it tells us how intensively a drug may be used on farm. For example, the percentage of broilers exposed. If, for example, there are 10 barns or houses, that's how we call them here in the Philippines. And if only 5 houses were medicated, then that's 50% exposure or 75%. And then moving on to quantification measures, it tells us the raw quantity used. So it might indicate the selection pressure. So we can quantify like the weight-based milligrams. We can say that we can arbitrarily determine low users from medium users to high users. So the milligrams per population correction unit. Because antibiotic A is not the same as antibiotic B. For example, if I'm using a drug, say tetracycline, which needed 500 grams per ton, versus an amoxicillin, which might need like 10 milligram per kilogram animal body weight. So they're different. So we need to account the inclusion rates or the quantity of antimicrobials by active ingredient. It tells us also the number of standard doses. So a metric known as the defined daily doses. So we standardize this with the dose. These are some more illustrations on how to estimate this. For example, here, we have 4 cohorts or provinces. Province 1 used 50%, so three flocks or 3 farms out of 6. Then the next province, there's only 1 flock or 1 farm out of 4. The other province has 4 out of 6, and again 3 out of 4. So overall, at the national level, or you can also say it's a company level, 11 out of 20 or 55% reported the use of antibiotic A. We can also use the same estimation methods using different metrics, like the medicated rations, the number of water treatments, the number of injections, or also by the WHO categorization system. How many flocks or farms were treated with the highest priority critically important antimicrobials? If your stewardship measure prohibits the use of HPCIAs, then this is also a way of measuring which producer or farms use these antimicrobials. Again, another illustration of a weight-based indicator. We have here the feed, the water, injection. So this estimation adds up all the different different rows of administration, and divided by the number of chickens, multiplied by 1 kilogram, which is a standard weight of treatment developed by the SBAC, or the European Surveillance for Veterinary Antimicrobial Consumption, the milligrams per PCU. So the 700 milligrams divided by 10 results to 70 milligrams per PCU. Then if we want to use a dose-based indicator, we just need to find the average daily dose, adjust the weights so that we can obtain the number of defined daily doses. So in these particular examples, there's 110 total DDDs, and now we divide it with the number of chickens, the days at rest, which is equivalent to the days of the growing period multiplied by 1,000. So this gives us 314 DDDs per 1,000 broiler chicken days at rest. So this is more a fancy and advanced calculation. Now to review, these are the formula or the maths for the milligrams per PCU. Milligrams active ingredient is divided by the flock population multiplied by 1 kilogram average weight of treatment. So this is a European standard. It might be different here in the Philippines. The alternate formula is using a different denominator. Instead of 1 kilogram, we are now using the live broiler pre-slaughter weight. It gives you a bigger denominator that gives you the milligram per kilogram animal biomass. These are illustrations or examples. For example, there are 3 farms. Farm A is a conventional flock, Farm B is also conventional, and Farm C is raised without antibiotics. These are the AMU profile, and this is the sum of milligrams used. For the RWA, we don't include the chemical coccidostats. We have the denominator. These are the population, they're relatively the same, 20,000, 22, 19. The average weight of treatment is 1, and the average live weight is these ones, 2, 4.1, 1.8. So these are roasters. So the milligram per kilogram animal biomass gives you this 315 for the flocks that use a lot of antibiotics, 92 for Farm B, and 0 for the RWA. When using the population correction unit as the denominator, because your denominator is slower, 1 only versus 2, it gives you a higher milligrams per PCU. So these are just a simple calculation for weight-based AMU indicator that you can apply in your own circumstance. And if we want to compare one producer to the other, this is what you do. So you do benchmarking and determine the total milligrams they used for that particular cycle or year. And the number of broiler flocks here, the y-axis can be also changed. The number of maybe companies or number of provinces or geographical locations, and what is the total consumption for those different cohorts or units. These are more advanced measurements. I also mentioned this previously. We incorporate new other input parameters like the days at risk and adjusting for those. So in summary, antimicrobial use monitoring informs stewardship in the poultry sector. So it brings all the puzzle and the pieces together for us to improve our stewardship action to reduce antimicrobial use overall. In conclusion, the monitoring of AMU helps us understand the emergence of AMR in the food animal sector. the preservation of the efficacy of antimicrobials, and reducing the emergence of resistant zoonotic bacteria like Salmonella and Campylobacter, the industry-wide resiliency or sustainability in challenging times, such as the COVID pandemic, will result to greater antimicrobial options for treating clinical or complicated conditions in veterinary and human medicine, and would potentially reduce the burden of illness in people. Thank you so much for your attention, and I would be happy to answer any questions you might have. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you very much, Dr. Agunos. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now proceed with the open forum. And we call on screen our plenary speakers, Dr. Dennis V. Umali, Drs. Cristina Laura M. Layson, and Dr. Agnes C. Agunos, for the open forum to be moderated by Dr. Riaz. We understand that Dr. Nathaniel Tablante and Dr. Kate Barger-Weathers are not available for the open forum.
Thank you very much. Before we proceed, I'd like to especially thank Dr. Agunos for that very comprehensive, highly technical and timely topic on antimicrobials. Yes, thank you very much, especially, of course, Dr. Umali, our local, but very good. And of course, Dr. Layson and Dr. Agunos, despite the time difference, you are here. So thank you very much for coming. Before we proceed with the Q&A, let me just quickly recap what we have covered this morning. Although Dr. Weathers is not here, she talked about animal welfare for practical animal assessment, and we should remember the 3 M's: monitor, measure, and manage. And let's use them as guiding factors to verify, understand, to achieve bird welfare. Dr. Tablante shared lessons learned about avian influenza based on his worldwide experience. Dr. Umali, of course, talked about avian influenza outbreak in the Philippines with updates on how it was transmitted and have identified the specific genome of the AI virus found in the Philippines. Of course, Dr. Layson talked about IBV, which is an economically important pathogen, and the other many IBV serotypes that are existing. According to her, IBV is a moving target, and we agree on that. We need to test to confirm. Finally, we had Dr. Agunos. The last slide was very important to us. He recommended that we should be monitoring antimicrobial use to help us understand the emergence of AMR in the food and animal sectors. We need to preserve the efficacy of antimicrobials to help us reduce the emergence of resistant zoonotic bacteria. This will give us wider antimicrobial options in veterinary and human medicines to reduce antimicrobial resistant foodborne pathogens. So our speakers, thank you very much. Well, I have received here 3 pages of questions. But I think what is good is that we have longer time because there's only 3 speakers that we are here. Those questions, again, for Dr. Tablante and Dr. Weathers would be sent to them via email, and we will send back the answers to our participants. Right. So if I may start, this first question is for, let me just make my page a little bigger. I'm already a grandmother, so I need to make it bigger. All right, let me start with Dr. Umali. He's the only thorn among the 2 roses here, but I want to start with him because he's from the Philippines. Dr. Umali, in addition to government disease surveillance in areas of high risk for AI virus, mayroon ba or are there other private sectors or institutions that are capable or deputized to do biosurveillance in migratory birds for prevention purposes? I think that's a very important question. Dr. Umali, please.
Hello, magandang umaga sa ating lahat and sana po lahat tayo nasa mabuting kaligayan despite the very bad weather these past few days, no? And again, congrats sa organizers nitong very wonderful event. So congrats. And before I answer the question, I would like to acknowledge lang, no? Very grateful tayo kay Doc Ronnie sa pagiging cool na ipahiram sa atin yung pictures. Alam niyo naman po na pag-discussion ng avian influenza, iba talaga pag nandoon ang indirect presence ni Doc Ronnie. Now, about sa questions, sabi natin technically very much capable ang ating mga regional laboratory, university laboratory, and other government laboratories sa characterization detection ng AI. But pagdating sa wild birds, ang main limitation is actually yung funding. Alam naman natin sa Pilipinas, ang major source ng funding pagdating sa livestock ay DA and DOST, especially PCARD, no? And through DA and DOST PCARD, ang kanilang mandate is sa mga food animals. Kaya pagdating sa wild birds, napakahirap mahanapan ng funding kasi walang national government agency na may budget for research funds for these organisms. And tama kayo, napaka-importante nito, no? As we saw earlier, Philippines ay ang strategic characteristics natin ay isolated tayo. We are an archipelago, wala tayong katabing bansa. Pagdating sa disease control, very much straightforward. Yun nga lang, pagdating sa AI, napakarami nating openings, and for the virus to be able to arrive dito sa Philippines, mamaya pag-usapan natin iba, no? So wild birds ay isa sa mga risk factors. Ayun, so I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Dr. Umali. I mean, indeed, it's not, it's not always that we have Dr. Umali here. So please just keep sending in your questions and we will hear more from him later on. Well, the next question is for Dr. Layson. Dr. Layson, what are the pros and cons of using a live vaccine vis-a-vis inactivated vaccine? Does this grant longer protection? How about introducing the virus to the flock due to vaccination despite having no previous presence in the farm? Dr. Layson, please.
Okay. Yeah, so thank you, Cor. Great questions. Good morning po. Magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. Filipino din po kami, tita.
Magandang gabi sa iyo dyan. Thank you.
Anyway, so the first question is, so yung difference between live attenuated at saka inactivated vaccines. So in our experience, yung pinaka-effective talaga is live attenuated vaccines. We are effects pag merong rolling reactions that we call it. So, nag-choppy ba ako?
Yeah,
Let
please.
me turn off my video. Yeah, okay. I will start again. Okay, yeah. Okay.
Go ahead.
Yes, I need a new laptop also. Anyway.
Paparinig ka yata.
Anyway, okay. So yung live attenuated vaccines, we find, at least in our experience, at least in my opinion, that it's more the more effective versus just inactivated vaccine. So typically, for bronchitis vaccination protocols, usually you prime with live attenuated vaccines, then you boost with inactivated vaccines. I think the reason is yung replication of the live attenuated vaccine just really gives a more robust immune response that's more that involves different arms of yung immune system. So yung tinatawag na humoral, so you would think of antibodies as well. So yung inactivated vaccines usually are more towards the antibodies, just the antibodies, but live attenuated vaccines also stimulate yung cellular immune responses that are really important for clearing the viruses. Yes. So,
Thank you.
yes. So yung second part of the vaccine, so introducing, I hope I'm interpreting it correctly.
Yes, you are.
Pero yung introduction of like a new a new subtype or a
Mhm.
new a new subtype. Yeah, so it's also it's there. If you test it in the lab, it will work. You know, you can have cross protection using different subtypes on different vaccines. The problem is if you are using a live attenuated vaccines, then you are introducing that vaccine virus. I can just say that in the US, it's not a practice, so or it's not. There isn't really a law saying that you can't, but most vets would prefer to just vaccinate with the subtypes that they already have, just because you don't want to introduce more variety in the pool, let's say. So there isn't really, and I'll leave it at that. So there are risks, I should say. So if you are willing to take that risk, then you, I'm not gonna recommend to do it or not do it.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Layson. I think
it's your choice.
I think it's really important for us to review and
Yeah.
make sure that what
Yeah.
we're doing is, is according to the correct, protocol. Anyway, yes, thank you so much. I'll be going back to you later, Dr. Layson. This time I have a question for Dr. Agunos. Dr. Agunos, currently most antimicrobials that was shown earlier are available in the following, over the counter and in different poultry vet supply here in the Philippines. What can you suggest to bring down the unwanted use of this antimicrobial, especially in our setup in the country? Thank you.
First, I would like to thank the organizers for the invitation to speak again. Yes, actually, over-the-counter is also a challenge in many low and middle-income countries because you need to regulate, so modernize the regulation that prohibits the distribution of antimicrobials for over-the-counter purchases. If that cannot be avoided, but I don't know, I'm just suggesting that there should be a vet or someone, an officer that would look at, I don't know, the agri-vet shops to provide consultation as well as maybe recommendation on proper and prudent use of the antimicrobials when the producers, backyard raisers are accessing them via those agri-vet shops.
Correct. Yeah. Well, unfortunately, we are still in the situation wherein, we've got these sources without, licensed veterinarian manning, especially the dispensing of antimicrobials or antibiotics, at least medicines. Thank you so much, Dr. Agudos. Let me go back to Dr. Dennis Umali here. Dr. Umali, how close is the genetic sequence of the H5 in the H5N1 that caused the devastation of poultry industry in Southeast Asia way back in 2005 to 2008 versus the H5 of current high pathogenic AI H5 circulating in Europe and other Southeast Asia countries? I think you have probably mentioned some of part of this, but can you simplify and share with us more?
Okay, very good question. Medyo technical yung question pero importante yan. Before I answer, flashback lang tayo kasi yung naitanong is nung 2005.
Yeah.
That was the time nung Asian episodic. I mean yung first time na yung Goose Guangdong nung nasa Hong Kong 1997 nag-spread, massive spread sa Asia Pacific region. Now, kung ang Goose Guangdong genotype 0, yung nag-spread sa Southeast Asia ay dalawang genotype yan. No? So, sa genotype 1.1 and yung mga sublineage niya. Yan yung genotype 2.1 and mga sublineage na. Yung genotype 2.1, yan yung mas close sa Pilipinas. Yan yung tumama sa Indonesia, Malaysia, in other nearby countries sa atin. However, yung genotype 1.1, ito yung sa Indochina, sa Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. Now, I don't have the complete data, pero kung i-cross-check natin yung San Luis, at least sa San Luis, no, yun yung meron tayong pinanghahawakan. So sa San Luis ay clade 2.3.4.4 and within the clade 2.3.4.4 siya 1.1.B. So on the H5, at least the hemagglutinin level, kung i-compare natin siya dun sa 2005 na mga strains, yung HA niya is 89% lang, similar. So napakalayo na talaga, very divergent. And that's the characteristic talaga ng bird flu. So as mentioned kanina, no? So next time siguro, picture naman ni Doc Reyes yung gagamitin natin.
I did
demonstrate
already.
recombination.
You did
So,
already a few years back, remember? In
Opo.
Thailand. Anyway, that was really good.
Ayun.
Yeah,
So I hope
well,
I answered the question.
yeah, you did. But before we move to the other speakers, can you further, let us know what is the chance that the same virus will come back, that we found in San Luis will come back in the country? I mean, you think, do you foresee? Parang
Yeah,
we're asking
very
you
good
to.
question. No? So
Yeah.
the problem with AI, so once pumasok sa country, there's a chance na maging endemic. So endemicity, especially sa Southeast Asia, majority ng Southeast Asian countries, year in year out, tinatamaan ng bird flu. Primarily kasi nga yung migration season, nandiyan dyan. Now, in other countries naman, sa Europe and US, so every year in, year out, meron silang mga breaks, pero dahil maganda yung biosecurity na, nakokontrol nila. So, episodic lang. Okay. So, with your question, for me, personally, sa poultry vet and nasa field, I will always include bird flu sa aking differential diagnosis.
All right. Thanks. Yeah. Thank you for that recommendation. Let's move to Dr. Layson. I will put together here two questions in one because they're actually related. Dr. Layson, on the control and prevention of IB, what do you suggest is the best vaccination program for IB variant positive farms? And what is your recommendation during vaccination in farm in IBB with 2 to 3 batches in one building, say pullets and layers? Can you put together those two questions, or you can answer it also separately if you want? Thank you.
Yeah, maybe I'll just put them together. Okay. And if you know, I can also ask a question after I answer this question. That too for Dr. Mali. Is that okay?
Sure. You can ask question also, but not to me. Huh?
Yeah, of course.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So with yung vaccination, for variant, so I guess I would say the experience with the decades of using bronchitis vaccine is the closer match that you have to what's circulating, that's the better vaccine to use. That said, that's not always available. It takes months, at least a year, to make the vaccine. So we can always do our best. The best thing for if you have a new variant is to make a new vaccine for it. I think I'm gonna leave it at that. And then for my question for Dr. Mali.
But before your question, can I again, because this one is also related to what you have just said. Yeah. Is there a molecular test that can differentiate a field IB virus from a vaccine IB virus? I think that's related to what you have just said. So
yes,
please.
Yes. There are tests available, but remember, IBV, bronchitis, the spike is variable. So the tests that are available that can distinguish between the challenge, what we call the challenge or yung virulent strain, and yung vaccine strains, they're very specific for that certain vaccine or for that certain virus. So I think maybe the issue would be whether or not the vaccines that are, or the viruses and vaccines that are in the Philippines, if there are tests available for that. It can definitely be developed. I hope it will be developed. But I don't know if it's available for use, at least for yung poultry vets in the Philippines. But that it can definitely be done. I would like to see more like data, like looking at different sequences, looking at what is really out there. So I guess it really boils down to, we really need to know what's out there to know how to best manage it. So naging parang catch-22.
Yeah, diagnosis is very
Yeah.
important. Thank you so much, Dr. Layson. Now you go ahead and ask Dr. Umali before I go to Dr. Agunos again.
Thank you for indulging me. Yeah, so I currently work with Avian Influenza. That's why I'm really interested also to ask if we know what other, like, so aside from the HA and the NA genes, what other, like, if we know how the which internal genes are also related, or like what internal genes are inside the viruses that spilled over sa Philippines.
Okay, very good question. No? It's great to know na hindi na tayo nag-iisa na nag-aaral ng bird flu. So looking forward to Christina. At least yung puting buhok natin yung mababawasan. But tama si Doc Christina, aside from HA and NA, these are the external genes. We need to characterize yung internal genes. And as presented kanina, at least sa San Luis lang, no? So San Luis, ayun lang yung authorized tayo na i-sequence. Yung internal genes niya, except sa M gene, is genotype 1.1.9, while yung kanyang M gene is genotype 1.1. So sa recent classification ng H5 and 6, yung ganong constellation is under genotype 1.1b. So about sa nucleotide sequence similarity, highly conserved yung mga clade 2.3.4.4 C, no? So sa wild birds. So highly related yung mga internal genes sa China, Japan, Korea na H5 and 6 cluster. So I hope in the future we can collaborate on bird flu. So welcome back and looking forward sa iyo sa Pilipinas.
Thank you, Doc Dennis. Yeah, that brings us to reading another question for Dr. Agunos. Dr. Agunos, I will be also reading 2 questions for you, but let me start with this one. Is it also possible to use HPLC to detect the antibiotic residues in meat?
Yes, I think you can use HPLC for detection of residues, beta-lactams and tetracyclines from meat samples.
Okay, thank you. Is there an available official protocol for the laboratories to follow on that particular test, Dr. Agunos?
The standard is liquid chromatography, mass spectrophotometry. So that for antibiotics. So all other residues, I think they can use other technique, but for antibiotics, the recommended is liquid chromatography and mass spectrophotometry.
Thank you. And I received a question who apparently knows you, but I don't have his name here. He said, Dr. Agunos, good to see you again. My question is, what are the antibiotics allowed in poultry production now in Canadian poultry? What happens when a flock gets disease which requires antibiotics, particularly for broiler meat and for eggs? Are these products going to be marketed in Canada particularly?
Yep, okay, yeah. Thanks for the question. Yeah, so there is a progressive elimination of certain classes of antimicrobials in Canada. So in the poultry industry, it's a voluntary elimination of antimicrobials. So they started with category 1 antimicrobials, including 3rd generation cephalosporins and the quinolones. They're not allowed to use those. Those are called extra label drug use, because the antimicrobials that are sold in Canada they are not labeled for use in poultry, any poultry at all. So if they use those antimicrobials, they have to write a prescription and declare it in the flag sheets. When these chickens or layers are sent, the chickens are sent to the slaughter plants. Now, the only antimicrobials that are available for prevention are bacitracins and avilomycins or tosomycins for the prevention of necrotic enteritis. In odd cases, they can use the older antimicrobials, penicillins, as well as tetracyclines for respiratory diseases. Tetracycline in combination with sulfonamides is also an extra label drug use. In Canada, that is only labeled for use in aquatic animals or aquaculture. There was a question. I don't know.
Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
What's going to happen with the treated layer flocks? There's also a limitation on what you can use in layers because those antimicrobials can be detected immediately in eggs. Right now, I think they can use only bacitracins to control necrotic enteritis. And in Canada, we don't have a lot of respiratory or systemic diseases other than the E. coli or coli bacillosis issues. That's all.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Agunos. Further to that, we read some news like, eggs and meat are already in the supermarket, and then suddenly, they have to pull them out because of, one example could be probably, detecting this kind of problem. Is the Canadian government paying the producers when they found out they have they have cases like this to compensate at least or not?
No. The testing is very random too. So there is a set number of samples per year. So the Canadian Food Inspection Agency is responsible for the testing. But I haven't heard that there were recalls associated with residues because even our national residue monitoring system detected very low levels. In some cases, they would detect some ionophore residues, but that is probably due to cross-contamination with turkey or broiler feeds at the feed mill level. But I think the levels are really low, the residue levels in eggs, at least.
Okay. Thank you. One other question that's related to that, and sorry, but I would want to ask you this first before we move to Dr. Umali here. In Canada, what penalty is imposed to raisers or farmers who are found to be non-compliant on the prudent use of antimicrobials?
So in Canada, we are supply managed. So meaning that you cannot legally raise chickens if you did not pay the quota. So the quota system is we pay certain amounts per quota unit, and this is managed by the marketing board. So we call them the marketing boards, the Chicken Farmers of Canada, Turkey Farmers of Canada, and we also have the corresponding sector-specific boards that monitors the volume of chickens or poultry products produced in our country. Now they also monitor the flock sheets. So each producer needs to declare what antimicrobials were used and what are the estimated withdrawal period for those particular antimicrobials.
Wow.
There is no, so penalty-wise, no. If you did not declare, I think there's no way of knowing. However, because we monitor extensively in terms of antimicrobial resistance. So I mentioned a while ago, the resistance is the smoking gun. Even if you don't declare that you did not use it, but if we detect this in meat, in the eggs, or in manure, or in humans, and it demonstrates a linkage, like using a more advanced or sophisticated tool, like whole genome sequencing. And that is the smoking gun. Even if you declared it, you did not use it, but we have other abilities to detect that they are contaminated, then you're screwed. Or, you are in a bad position, I guess.
Yeah.
The industry is also at risk of having a bad reputation. So it will impact their bottom line as well as their reputation of that particular sector.
Thank you, Dr. Agunos. I've got a few more related questions, but I will let you rest and we'll go to Dr. Umali first. Dr. Umali, there's a question here. From your experience or from this experience that we had in San Luis, can we more or less project the next possible outbreak in the Philippines? And in addition, are we prepared to address another potential bird flu outbreak?
Okay, very good question. No? Doon muna sa pangalawa, are we prepared to address the next outbreak?
Another possible
outbreak.
Let's not ask for it, but
Tama po kayo. Sabihin natin na year on year, the Philippine government and at least ating mga local veterinarians and LGU veterinarians and mga labs natin, no? So sabi natin they are getting better and better. So with the previous experiences ay malaking improvement yung nakikita natin on the ground. Pagdating sa technical side, sa mga sequencing, we have support na rin, no, from other international laboratories, FAO, and mga private agencies, and university lab abroad. And si Doc Christina Layson, no, parating na rin. So we have more brains on the ground. Now, pagdating sa kung prepared tayo, I cannot say as a whole. Multifactorial po kasi talaga eh. But technical wise, I think kayang-kaya. Magagaling ang mga Filipino veterinarians, magagaling ang ating mga LGUs. But yung tingin kong talagang gray area is yung with the fragmentation ng BAI saka LGU na kailangan LGU muna bago dumating sa BAI. I think ayun yung pinaka weak point natin, no?
Yeah.
So sana ma-revise yung portion na yun. At least sa disease control. Now, dun sa unang question, if we can forecast. So maganda sa bird flu talagang very predictable, no? So masasabi mo yung mga seasons na malamang makapasok siya. So as mentioned kanina, kapag on the site ng breeding, on the perspective sa Philippines, no? So talagang July and August yung peak detection. Kasi dikit-dikit yung mga migratory birds and marami tayong juveniles na wala pang immunity for the virus o tumataas yung incidence. And ngayon September, so sana naman nakatawid na tayo, no? So we are expecting na this year baka makapasok si bird flu kasi 2020 we had a big outbreak in Europe, in Japan, in China, Korea. And glad na wala pa tayong na-report, no? But again, as poultry veterinarian, no, so we have to always include bird flu sa ating differential diagnosis. And pagdating sa bird flu sa klase ng or sa setup ng government natin, bago makarating sa BAI, kailangan mo na dumaan sa LGU. So yung reporting, yung prompt reporting yung importante.
Yeah.
So I hope I answered the question.
Yeah. Thanks, Dr. Umali. I mean, just a little more on that. Yesterday we heard about the increase in the number of layer, population. Obviously, because a lot of pig farmers who were hit with ASF shifted to layer industry, and you know that avian influenza is affecting more layer farms. Do you see, that this situation due to increased number of farms would somehow not really favor, but add to the potential bird flu outbreak in the near future?
Very good.
I hope not, but yeah.
So the more birds we have in the ground, so the higher the probability na magkaroon ng sustained outbreak. And kung may mga bagong players na nag-aaral pa lang sa poultry, so yung mga fundamentals minsan, especially biosecurity, recognition ng mga diseases, inaaral pa nila, no? So magandang may mga ganitong event para mas mapabilis natin, ma-accelerate yung kanilang learning curve, especially sa disease.
I think it's where the PCPP and of course all other practicing veterinarians really, needed. Thank you so much. Thank you for that answer, for that insight, Dr. Umali. Let me move to Dr. Layson. Dr. Layson, are there any commercially available PCR kits for serotyping IVB strains?
Yeah, so yes, so yung I think I mentioned it earlier, yung differentiation usually that's used to differentiate yung vaccine strain and yung challenge strains, those are quantitative PCR. At least yung most cost effective. You can also do fancier stuff like sequencing, or you can isolate the viruses. A bit expensive. But yeah, yung quantitative PCR, I think yung most used, I believe, for diagnostic tests. Yung maybe I shouldn't mention, there are companies that sell it. Again, like the only issue I think would be if the the strains that are circulating in the Philippines if they match those that are. So remember yung qPCR, they're really short, parang 20, like there are a few primers, pero it really just amplifies the short part, usually around 100 to 200 base pairs. So it's really short. Yung chances mo of it really depends. So we will need to do more testing to see if it does work for the viruses that are circulating in the Philippines. Yeah.
All right. So related to that, for IBV ELISA, will the reaction be the same for variants and classical viruses? Is the sensitivity kits the same for both variants?
For ELISA, yeah. So yung quantitative PCR, that's yung virus sequence, so yung genome niya. But yung IBV ELISA, there are usually the commercial kits are against the nucleoprotein. So remember yung quantitative PCR, usually that differentiates the vaccine strains, you've got yung virulent strains, those are for the spike. So which is the most variable part of its genome. So it's really why we use it, because we can really differentiate different strains. But for IBV ELISA, most commercial kits use the nucleoprotein, which is highly conserved. So most I should say all IBV, at least so far that I've seen, should react with the ELISA.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Layson. We're going into the last maybe 6-7 minutes of this Q&A, but I'd like to ask these two questions to Dr. Agunos before I ask your last message. Dr. Agunos, is the drug residues in meat will result to bacterial resistance to human if consumed? If the MRLs of meat pass the acceptable Codex Alimentarius limit, will it result to drug resistance? Can you please elaborate on that, Dr. Agunos?
Thank you. Yes, that's always a confusion, but we haven't seen research studies that links residues and resistance. So for resistance to happen, say for example, I consume a contaminated chicken or pork with residues, high levels of tetracycline, for example, you need to establish dose response relationships, but that is very difficult to do. So in short, there's no linkage between residue and resistance. Maybe prolonged use of antibiotics, you consume the antibiotics, but not through meat, because I would assume that it has very low levels, not enough to result to the cell bactericidal or bacteriostatic property. You need to consume like kilograms or maybe grams of antimicrobials for that to become to result to resistance in the gut flora, resulting to resistance in the gut flora.
Thank you. Well, a related question here is there any standard on the maximum or critical levels of antibiotics or antimicrobials in meat, and maybe the acceptable level that is safe for human consumption? I would assume here that maybe it depends also if you eat a lot of meat. Can you elaborate also on that, please, Dr. Agunos?
Yes. So the Codex Alimentarius is provides a standard for all the different products. So that is being used. So in other countries, in the EU, they have their own, as well as in the United States and Canada. Yeah, all countries are also following the Codex guidelines. And the maximum residue limit is actually the basis for drug manufacturers or drug sponsors when they establish the withholding or withdrawal period. So those are all linked. So that's why you need a thorough research or study before you even approve that particular antimicrobials to be sold and distributed for use in food animals. So without those critical details, I guess, then and also with unregulated sale and distribution of the antimicrobials and no standards for those MRLs and withdrawal period, I think it is going to be very difficult to implement antimicrobial use in or stewardship in poultry production or any food animal setting.
Yeah, I would say it's everyone's responsibility indeed. Thank you so much, Dr. Acunos. If I may give, each of you to please give your parting message to the Filipino poultry, industry, veterinarians, poultry practitioners, on how important it is also, to practice our profession, and of course our producers. If I may start with Dr. Agunas, please.
Yeah, I think in terms of stewardship, we all have our role. So either this can be our corporate responsibility to use antimicrobials prudently. This would, I think this would have an impact in human health. So it starts with the way we prescribe antimicrobials and the way we educate our producers on how they are using these antimicrobials. Efficacy is important, so that's why preservation of antimicrobials is it should be our goal when we are recommending a treatment to our producers. So that is one way we can reduce the emergence of resistance, as well as reduce the public health or food safety implications of our actions at the farm level. So, and then, yeah, I guess we should be responsible for containing antimicrobial resistance, as well as to the reduction of the burden of illness. And we should not be contributing to the whole health issue in times such as this. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Agunos. May we hear from Dr. Layson, please?
Yes, thank you so much for your attention and for all the wonderful questions. This has been really my pleasure to share my expertise with you, and also share your hear your thoughts and your concerns about bronchitis especially. And yeah, bronchitis is a moving target, like I said with my talk. So it's really this time of molecular biology and technology, it's really a great time to use evidence-based strategies. Like if we really are looking for managing what's out there, then we need to know our enemy, so to speak. So so I hope that more vets will be more open to using technology that we have, because we definitely can do it. There's expertise around it. We'll just have to look for it and seek for it. So if there's demand, we'll make it happen. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Layson. Really nice having you again. Let's hear from Dr. Dennis Umali. Dr. Umali.
Okay, so again, thank you sa PCPP for the invitation to present today. And right now, we are living in quite an unusual times. May outbreaks sa humans, may outbreaks sa swine. In other countries, may outbreaks sa horse. And we don't want another outbreak sa poultry kasi bingo na masyado yun. And if we will have an outbreak na similar magnitude sa poultry, bird flu talaga yung mukhang apple to apple. But the good thing about bird flu, there are ways to prevent na magkaroon tayo ng massive outbreak. I think the national government ay naka-ready anytime. The local government trained na to deal with these cases. Yung missing lang talaga is yung early reporting, no? And pagdating sa early reporting, nasa sa atin na yon, being vets on the ground, saka mga farmers on the ground. So as mentioned kanina, no, so may ducks, may ducksman, may broiler, may breeder, layer, quails, and so on. One poultry, one industry. Pagdating sa bird fly, may equality, lahat ay pantay-pantay, lahat ay pwede tamaan. So with that, biosecurity and early detection, early monitoring, and early reporting ay important to prevent massive outbreak na similar sa COVID and ASF. So with that, thank you. So keep safe everyone, and salamat po.
Thank you so much, Dr. Umali. Unfortunately, we have few more questions for each of you, but we will send those through email. And also those questions that we received for Dr. Tablante and Dr. Weather will also be sent to them for their answers. And we will email back those answers to those who sent the questions. So thank you so much to all our brilliant speakers for sharing your knowledge, experience, and of course, your valuable time with our Filipino poultry practitioners and poultry producers. We learned a lot and we appreciate it. Thank you so much.